Hey everyone! Tonight we are stepping back into a world where the lines between a professional army and a predatory startup are blurred by the mist of the Mediterranean. Imagine you are standing on the sun-baked docks of Messina in 1302. The air is thick with the scent of dried fish, cheap wine, and the metallic temps of sharpening steel. You aren't a knight in shining armor. You are an Almogavara, rugged frontiersman from the wild borders of Spain, dressed in animal skins and worn leather, carrying a heavy javelin and a short sword that has seen far too much use. Around you, thousands of men with calloused hands and eyes like flint are waiting for a command. You've spent years fighting the War of the Vespers, but now peace has been declared. And for a man whose only resume skill is professional violence, peace is a looming bankruptcy. You probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon in this camp without losing a limb or your purse. As these men are as quick to brawl with each other as they are to gut an enemy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening while drifting off or working late, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fascinating to see where in the world our little archive has reached tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the grit of the Sicilian sand in your boots as you watch a man named Roger de Flor stride toward the center of the docks. He doesn't look like your typical general. He's a former Templar, kicked out of the order for allegedly skimming a bit too much off the top during the fall of Acre. He's a man who understands that in this new century, loyalty is a line item on a balance sheet. He's standing there, looking over the crowd, and he tells you that the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos II is desperate. The Turks are closing in on Constantinople, and the emperor needs a fire to fight a fire. But Roger isn't just offering a job. He's pitching a merger. You are now a part of the Gran Compagnia Catalana, the great Catalan Company. This isn't just an army. It's a mobile, sovereign corporation. While most medieval soldiers fight for a lord because their father did, you are fighting for a share of the equity. The company operates on a system of shared spoils and democratic councils. You aren't just a cog in a machine. You're a shareholder with a deadly dividend. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Almogavars were considered some of the most effective light infantry in the Middle Ages, primarily because they didn't rely on expensive horses or heavy plate mail. Instead, you rely on your own 2 feet and a terrifying battle cry, Despera. Awaken the iron. You watch as your comrades strike their blades against the stones, creating a shower of sparks that illuminates the twilight. It's a psychological tactic designed to make the enemy believe they are fighting demons, not men. As you prepare to board the galleys, you hear a quirky bit of fringe lore passed around the campfire. Some of the veterans swear that the Almogavars carry firestones in their pouches that can ignite a man's soul if he looks at them too long during a lunar eclipse. It's nonsense, of course, but the superstition adds to the aura of dread you carry with you. You find your spot on the ship, the wood groaning under the weight of thousands of Spanish mercenaries, their families, and their gear. The Byzantine Emperor has promised double the usual pay and high-ranking titles for Roger. But you know the gold hasn't actually arrived yet. You're sailing on a promise, a venture capital investment fueled by the hope of Eastern riches. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Emperor truly intended to pay the company or if he was simply hoping you would kill enough Turks and get killed in the process to solve 2 of his problems at once. As the sails catch the wind and Sicily fades into a dark smudge on the horizon, you realize you are part of a grand experiment. You aren't just invading the East, you are bringing a proto-capitalist war machine into a world of ancient crumbling empires. Your boots hit the deck with a rhythmic thud, echoing the heartbeat of an army that belongs to no king, only to the contract. The transition from the Western Mediterranean to the Eastern is a long, grueling stretch of salt and hardtack, but the promise of Constantinople keeps your hand on your hilt. You are no longer a displaced peasant. You are an employee of the most dangerous corporation in the 14th century, and the market of Anatolia is wide open for a hostile takeover. The nights on the Mediterranean are colder than you expected. You huddle with your brothers-in-arms, men who speak the rough dialects of Aragon and Catalonia. You talk about what you'll buy with your first share of the spoils, perhaps a vineyard in Thrace or a villa with a view of the Golden Horn. You laugh at the thought of the refined Byzantines seeing your grisly-stained tunics and unwashed hair. To them, you are barbarians. To Roger de Flor, you are the ultimate leverage. He moves among you, not as a remote deity, but as a CEO who knows his staff by name. He understands that if the bread runs out or the pay is docked, this corporation will liquidate its management without a second thought. You see him looking toward the east, his eyes reflecting the stars, already calculating the exchange rate of Byzantine hyperpyra to Catalan gold. The ship's hull slaps against the waves, a steady, hypnotic pulse. You close your eyes and imagine the great city Constantinople. You've heard it has walls that touch the sky and more gold than there is sand in Sicily. But you also know that the emperor is weak. His empire is a shell, a beautiful, gilded ghost of its former self. You are the muscle he needs to keep that ghost alive, but muscle has a tendency to bruise whatever it touches. You aren't just going there to save them, you're going there to change the price of survival. As the first light of dawn begins to crack the horizon, the silhouette of the Greek coastline appears. This is the beginning of the end for the world as you know it, and the beginning of a legend that will be whispered in the archives for centuries. You stand up, stretch your aching limbs, and prepare to meet the man who bought your soul for a year's wages. The ships finally pull into the docks of Constantinople, and the sheer scale of the city hits you like a physical blow. You've seen Messina, and you've seen the rugged outposts of the Spanish frontier, but this is a forest of marble and gold. As you step off the gangplank, you aren't just a soldier. You are an asset in the most ambitious corporate restructuring of the Middle Ages. Roger de Flor stands at the prow of his galley, looking less like a humble mercenary and more like a man who just purchased the horizon. He's already negotiated his title, Megas Due, the Great Duke. It's a position of immense power in the Byzantine hierarchy, and for a former Templar who was once accused of being little more than a high-seas racketeer, it's a staggering promotion. You watch him adjust his mantle, and you realize that your leader isn't just a general, he's a visionary who understands that an army without a brand is just a mob. Roger's corporate vision is simple but revolutionary for 1303. The great Catalan Company is a legal entity that exists, independently of any monarch. You have your own seal, your own treasury, and your own internal justice system. While the feudal lords of Europe are busy bickering over ancestral rights, Roger is busy drafting contracts. He has convinced the emperor to pay the company's wages in advance, a feat of salesmanship that borders on the miraculous given that the Byzantine treasury is currently about as full as a leaky bucket in a drought. You see the chests of coin being hauled off the ship's Byzantine hyperpyra, the dollars of the Middle Ages. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Byzantine currency was the standard for international trade for centuries. Though by the time you arrive, its gold content has been debased so many times, it's starting to look a bit more like pale copper. The office culture of the company is unlike anything you've ever experienced. Every decision of importance is filtered through a council of leaders. But the rank-and-file men like you have a voice that carries weight. It's a profit-sharing model. If the company takes a city, the loot isn't just funneled to the top. It's appraised, cataloged, and distributed based on your rank and your contribution to the project. You probably wouldn't survive the HR department of this company. Though, because dispute resolution usually involves a dagger and a quick prayer, Roger manages this volatile mix of egos with a charisma that feels almost supernatural. He knows that if he can keep the Almogavars fed and paid, he can point them at any target in the world and watch it crumble. He's the CEO of a startup whose only product is victory, and business is about to pick up. There's a quirky tidbit of fringe history that says Roger de Flor actually kept a private ledger written in a secret Templar code documenting not just the company's finances, but the secret locations of hidden caches of relics he'd smuggled out of the Holy Land. Your fellow soldiers whisper about it over watered-down wine in the taverns of the Pera district. They say he isn't just here to fight Turks. He's here to build a new Zion in the East. Whether or not that's true, his ambition is infectious. He marries the emperor's niece, Maria Poliologina, practically overnight. In a single stroke, your boss has become royalty. It's the ultimate failing upward story, turning a disgraced knight into the son-in-law of an emperor. You see him at the wedding feast, draped in purple, and you can't help but chuckle. The man who once shared a moldy crust of bread with you on a Sicilian beach is now dining on peacock and spiced wine. But the corporate merger isn't going as smoothly as the press releases suggest. The local Greeks look at you with a mixture of terror and disgust. To the refined citizens of Constantinople, you are the Latins, the same flavor of Westerners who sacked their city only a century ago during the Fourth Crusade. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a cold tell. You notice the way the Varangian Guard, the emperor's elite, axe-wielding bodyguards track your movements with their eyes. They are the established, legacy firm, and you are the disruptive new competitor in town. Historians still argue whether Roger de Flor's ultimate goal was to save the Byzantine Empire or to eventually host a hostile takeover and crown himself emperor. Looking at the way he carries himself in the Great Palace, you're leaning toward the latter. You spend your days in the city waiting for the launch date of the Anatolian campaign. The company is a restless beast. Without a war to fight, the Almogavars start looking for trouble in the streets. There's a famous brawl that breaks out with the Genoese, the dominant merchant class in the city. It's not just a bar fight. It's a turf war between rival economic interests. The Genoese want to maintain their trade monopoly, and they do unlike the look of several thousand Spanish mercenaries who do unpay their tabs and answer every complaint with a hand on a sword hilt. You find yourself in the middle of a street skirmish, dodging cobblestones and Genoese crossbow bolts, realizing that the corporate culture of the company is one of extreme aggression. You don't just work for the company, you are the company, and an insult to one is a line of credit canceled for all. Roger eventually calls a meeting of the board. He tells you that the emperor's checks are clearing, and it's time to move across the Bosphorus to Anatolia. The Turks have reached the shores of the Sea of Marmara, and the client is demanding results. You feel a sense of relief. The city is too cramped, too full of rules and subtle insults. You crave the open field, the smell of wood smoke, and the merger of your blade with an enemy's throat. As you prepare to cross into Asia, you realize that the great Catalan Company is more than just an army, it's a living, breathing machine designed for expansion. You're not just going to fight a war. You're going to open a new branch office in the heart of the enemy's territory. The transition from the capital to the front lines is swift. The company moves with a logistical efficiency that would make a modern supply chain manager weep with joy. Every man knows his role, every mule is packed to capacity, and the product is ready for delivery. You watch the skyline of Constantinople fade behind you as the ferries carry you into the east. You're leaving the world of diplomacy and entering the world of raw operations. The forgotten archives of history often skip over the paperwork of war. But you know that every arrow, every ration of grain, and every drop of blood is being accounted for. The Catalan Company doesn't just win, it audits the dead. And as you step onto the soil of Asia Minor, you know the audit is about to begin. The crossing of the Bosphorus feels less like a military maneuver and more like a mass migration of a predatory species. You are jammed onto a ferry, shoulder to shoulder, with men who smell of old leather and the sharp acidic temps of cheap wine. The Windark Sea, as the poets called it, is choppy today, sending sprays of salt over the gunnels that sting your eyes and rust your gear. You spend the transit scrubbing at your coattail with a piece of oily rag, watching the golden domes of the city shrink into the distance. Behind you lies the political labyrinth of the palace. Ahead lies the market of Anatolia, where the only currency that matters is steel. You're trading the soft beds of the Para district for the hard, unforgiving earth of Asia Minor. And honestly, you prefer it that way. The company doesn't thrive in parlors, it thrives in the dirt. As the coastline of Asia Minor looms closer, you get a real sense of the corporate logistics that Roger de Flor has mastered. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Byzantine navy was a shadow of its former self by the early 14th century, often relying on hired Genoese or Venetian vessels to move troops. However, the Catalan Company has its own fleet of galleys, managed with the kind of obsessive detail you'd expect from a merchant house. Roger treats these ships like a floating supply chain. You aren't just carrying soldiers, you're carrying the wives, children, and even the mistresses of the Almogavars. This isn't a temporary deployment. It's a nomadic corporation moving its entire headquarters to the front lines. The presence of the families ensures that the men don't desert after all. Where would you go when your entire world is on the ship next to you? During the voyage, you hear a quirky bit of fringe lore from an old sailor who claims to have served with the Templars before the fall of Acre. He tells you that the sea between Europe and Asia is haunted by the ghosts of drowned empires, and that if you drop a silver coin into the deepest part of the strait, the currents will carry it directly to a secret vault beneath the Hagia Sophia. You probably wouldn't survive the attempt to verify this, as the currents here are notoriously treacherous. but the story speaks to the atmosphere of the company. You are a group of men who have lost their homes in the West and are now searching for a new one in the bones of the East. There's a sense of manifest destiny among the ranks. Belief that the wealth of the ancient world is simply waiting for a firm with enough disruptive potential to claim it. The landing at Artiki, modern-day Urdik, is a chaotic symphony of braying mules and shouting sergeants. You are finally in the wind-dark territory of the enemy. The Turks have been raiding these shores with impunity, but they haven't encountered a force multiplier like the Almogavars yet. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine locals actually welcomed you, or if they viewed your arrival with the same dread they felt for the Turkish raiders. You see the look in the eyes of the local Greek farmers as you march past their olive groves, a look of profound exhaustion. To them, you are just another expense, another mouth to feed, another protection fee they have to pay in the hope of not being slaughtered. You realize that in the business of medieval warfare, the civilians are the ultimate tax base, and the Catalan Company is here to collect. As you set up camp on the Sicilian Peninsula, the atmosphere changes. The relaxed, almost lazy vibe of the Constantinople taverns is gone, replaced by a cold, professional focus. You watch the middle management, the Adelids and Almagatans checking the watchfires and organizing the perimeter. The Almogavar way of war is built on light movement and high-speed deliverables. You don't wear heavy mail that slows you down in the heat. You wear the kaladra, a simple leather cap, and your thick skins. You are built for the rugged terrain of Anatolia, where a heavy knight would be a sitting duck. You spend the night sharpening your javelins, the askanaz, by the light of a small fire. You've heard the Turks are nearby, and you eager to see if their light cavalry can stand up to a wall of angry Catalans who have been paid their full bonus yet. There is a strange beauty to the Anatolian night. The stars seem larger here, more piercing. You sit with your back against a stone wall that was likely built by the Romans 1,000 years ago, feeling the weight of history beneath you. You read a part of the forgotten archives because your story does unfit the neat boxes of national history. You aren't fighting for Spain or Byzantium or even for the Pope. You're fighting for the entity. If the company succeeds, you get a share of the land and the gold. If it fails, you are a nameless mercenary buried in a foreign field. It's the ultimate high-risk, higher-word career path. You think about the corporate retreats of your youth, the long marches across the Iberian Peninsula, and realize those were just training for this moment. The sun begins to rise over the Sea of Marmara, painting the water in shades of bruised purple and gold. Roger de Flor is already up, inspecting the lines. He doesn't look tired. He looks like a man who is about to close a deal. The word goes out. The Turks are less than a day's march away. The market research is over, and the product launch is about to begin. You feel a familiar tightening in your chest, a mixture of adrenaline and the cold. Practical realization that some of the men you shared bread with this morning, won't be around to see the sunset. You grab your javelins, check the laces on your sandals, and prepare to move out. You are the muscle of the great Catalan Company, and the Anatolian branch is officially open for business. The march inland is quiet, save for the rhythmic crunch of thousands of boots on dry grass. You notice the way the light catches the iron tips of the javelins ahead of UAC of needles, waiting to be threaded into the enemy. You've been told the Turks fight like the wind, swirling around you and peppering you with arrows, but they've never met a company that operates like a single, multi-headed organism. You are a collective, a corporate entity where every employee knows that their survival is tied to the man next to them. As the first dust clouds of the enemy scouts appear on the horizon, you take a deep breath of the dry, dusty air. The Byzantine Empire might be dying, but for the Catalan Company, business is just starting to boom. Standing within the shadow of the Blacherney Palace, you feel remarkably out of place in your grizzle-stained leather and salt-crusted boots. The Byzantine court is a symphony of silk, incense, and hushed Greek whispers, a stark contrast to the shouting and clashing of iron you left behind at the docks. You are part of the honor guard, accompanying Roger de Flor as he officially presents the company's progress report to Emperor Andronikos II. The air in the throne room is heavy, not just with the scent of expensive resins, but with a palpable, vibrating tension. You realize that, while you've been out in the mud securing the borders, the corporate headquarters here in Constantinople has been whispering about your overheads. To the emperor, you are a necessary evil. To the court officials, you are a predatory debt that they can't quite figure out how to restructure. You stand at attention, your hand resting on the hilt of your koltel, watching the emperor. He looks old, his face a map of the stresses of a shrinking empire. It's a mainstream historical fact that Andronikos II was a deeply pious and intellectual man, but he was also the ruler who oversaw the drastic downsizing of the Byzantine navy to save Munya, move that forced him to hire firms like yours in the first place. He looks at you and your brothers in arms with a mixture of hope and profound regret. You probably wouldn't survive the courtly etiquette of this room. One wrong step, or a poorly timed sneeze, and you'd be hauled off by the silk-clad guards for insulting the divine majesty. You keep your eyes forward, noticing how the polished marble floor reflects your rugged reflection like a cruel joke. The meeting is less about strategy and more about the invoice. Roger de Flor, now the megas due, is demanding the back pay promised to the men. He speaks the language of power with a Templar's confidence, reminding the emperor that the Turks are only held back by the Catalan line. There's a quirky, fringe tidbit that claims the Byzantine treasurers actually tried to pay the company in ghost coinslid or copper pieces plated in a thin layer of gold that would wear off after a few weeks of handling. Whether that's true or just a legend born of mercenary bitterness, the distrust is real. You've seen the way your comrades bite into every coin they receive, checking for the softness of true gold. In the company, a bad check from the client isn't just a clerical error, it's a casus belli. The tension isn't just about money, though it's about cultural fit. The Byzantines see themselves as the last flame of civilization in a darkening world. And you, with your rough dialect and penchant for brawling in the streets of Pera, are a reminder of how far they've fallen. You overhear a courtier whisper, a phrase that translates roughly to the Latin plague, and you have to fight the urge to show him exactly how plague-like your short sword can be. Historians still argue whether Andronikos II actually feared a Turkish conquest more than he feared a Catalan one. You see it in his eyes, the realization that he has invited a wolf into the house to chase out the foxes, and now the wolf is asking for the keys to the pantry. As the formal audience ends, you are led back through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. You pass mosaics of saints that seem to judge your blood-stained soul with their golden eyes. The unlucky welcome doesn't stop at the palace gates. Even the local clergy seem to shrink away from you, crossing themselves as if you were a walking omen of the apocalypse. You realize that the company is operating in a social vacuum. You have no allies here, only a contract. This is the danger of the mercenary corporation model. When you are untied to the land or the people by blood or faith, you are only as good as your last quarterly earnings. If the company stops winning, or if the emperor runs out of gold, the relationship won't just end, it will implode. Back at the camp outside the city walls, the mood is surly. The men have heard rumors that the emperor's son, Michael IX, loathes the company and is lobbying for your termination. Michael represents the old guard, the traditional military establishment that feels insulted by your presence. He sees you as disruptors who have bypassed the traditional chain of command. You sit by the fire, eating a piece of tough salted mutton, and realize that you are caught between two fires. To your front are the Turks, and to your rear is a client who is looking for any excuse to void the agreement. It's a classic corporate standoff. You check your gear again, feeling the weight of the javelins. You know that as long as you are useful, you are safe. But the moment the Turkish threat recedes, the company becomes the new threat. There's a strange, quiet moment as the sun sets over the Golden Horn. You look out at the city, its walls glowing like amber in the fading light. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, and yet you know it's a cage. The company is a creature of movement and expansion. Being stationary in the capital is making everyone twitchy. Roger de Flor knows this too. He's already planning the next move, pushing the emperor to send the company back into the field. He knows that the only way to keep the board of directors from turning on him is to keep them busy with new acquisitions. You hear the command being passed down the lines. We move out at dawn. As you prepare your bedroll, you think about the emperor's face. He looked like a man who knew he'd made a deal with the devil and was just waiting for the bill to come due. You aren't the devil, of course you're just a man who wants to get paid for a job well done. But in the world of 14th century geopolitics, there isn't much of a difference. You close your eyes, the soft hum of the city in the distance, and dream of the Anatolian plains. Out there, the rules are simpler. Out there, you don't have to worry about cultural fit or ghost coins. You just have to worry about the man in front of you. The unlucky welcome is over. The real work is about to begin. The air on the Anatolian side of the Sea of Marmara is differentiated, dustier, and heavy with the scent of wild thyme and impending violence. You are no longer navigating the suffocating etiquette of the Byzantine court. You are back in the field, and the merger with the enemy is finally at hand. You find yourself near the ruins of ancient Cyzicus, a place where the stones of Greek temples lie toppled like discarded playthings. The Turks, under the leadership of the Karamanid Beys, have been laying waste to these lands, but they haven't yet accounted for the Catalan method. As you march into position, you feel the familiar, rhythmic thud of your heart against your ribs. This is the product launch your CEO, Roger de Flor, has been promising. The Battle of Cyzicus is your baptism by fire in the East, and it's a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Almogavars excelled because they completely ignored the chivalric code of the era. You don't wait for a formal challenge or a trumpet blast to signal a charge. Instead, you move in the pre-dawn gray, a silent tide of leather and iron. You watch as the Turkish camp begins to wake, the smoke from their cook fires curling lazily into the sky. They expect a slow, heavy Byzantine column that they can pepper with arrows and outmaneuver on horseback. They don't expect 5,000 screaming Spaniards to come sprinting out of the mist on foot, moving with the terrifying speed of hunting dogs. You grip your Ascona, your heavy javelin, and wait for the signal. When it comes, it isn't a melodic horn. It's the guttural roar of thousands of men striking their blades against stone. Desperta Pharaoh. Desperta Pharaoh. The sparks fly in the darkness, and then you are running. You probably wouldn't survive the initial collision if you were trying to fight like a knight, but you aren't. You are a disruptive technology. As the Turkish cavalry tries to mount and organize, you are already among them. You've been trained to aim for the Horseza tactic, considered unknightly in the West, but incredibly efficient in the corporate logic of the company. You duck under the swing of a scimitar and drive your short sword into the flank of a charging stallion. The world tilts, screams fill the air, and suddenly the unbeatable light cavalry of the East is tangled in a bloody heap of their own making. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore associated with this battle, suggesting that the Almogavars carried small pouches of holy salt, blessed by a rogue priest in Sicily, which they threw into the eyes of the enemy to blind them before the final strike. While likely a tall tale meant to explain your uncanny success, it fits the devilish reputation you are rapidly building. You don't feel like a saint. You feel like a professional. You move from target to target with a cold, industrial efficiency. The Turks are used to the feint and retreat style of warfare, but you offer no retreat. You are a wall of aggression that keeps moving forward, liquidating every pocket of resistance you encounter. By the time the sun is fully above the horizon, the Turkish camp is a ruin. The victory is absolute. It wasn't just a win. It was a market correction. You've cleared the peninsula in a single morning, doing more for the emperor in 4 hours than his own armies had done in 4 years. Historians still argue whether this victory was the result of superior Catalan tactics or simply a massive failure of Turkish intelligence, who didn't realize they were facing a professional mercenary corporation instead of a feudal levy. Regardless of the reason, the result is the same. The road to the interior of Anatolia is now open, and the investors back in Constantinople are going to be very pleased with the initial ROI. You spend the afternoon auditing the battlefield. In the Catalan Company, the collection of spoils is as organized as the fighting itself. You don't just grab what you can and run. You bring your finds to a central collection point where the Attalids oversee the inventory. You find silk tents, ornate saddles, and bags of silver coins. You get your share a heavy purse that feels satisfyingly real after the ghost coins of the capital. You sit on a fallen marble column wiping Turkish blood from your arm with a handful of dry grass and look at your comrades. They are tired, blood-streaked, and grinning. The company has proven its value. You aren't just Latins anymore. You are the indispensable muscle of the East. But as you look at the piles of bodies being stripped of their gear, a thought crosses your mind. You've just destroyed the local competition, but in doing so, you've made yourself the most powerful force in the region. In business, when a startup becomes too successful, the larger corporations start to get nervous. You remember the face of the emperor's son, Michael, and his cold, calculating eyes. You've saved his empire today, but you've also shown him exactly how dangerous you are. You wonder if he's currently celebrating your victory or drafting a plan to downsize the company before you become too big to manage. The night after the battle is surprisingly quiet. There is no wild, drunken revelry. The Almogavars are too professional for that. Instead, there is the sound of sharpening steel, a constant, rhythmic shishish that serves as the company's lullaby. You lie back on your bedroll, looking up at the Anatolian stars, and realize that Cyzicus was just the first milestone. Roger de Flor has already mapped out the next quarterly goals. You're heading deeper into the heart of the peninsula, toward Philadelphia and the Taurus Mountains. You are a part of a machine that has just tasted its first real success. And like any high-growth corporation, the only way to go is forward. You close your eyes, the scent of smoke and iron lingering in your nostrils, and prepare for the long march into the interior. The victory at Cyzicus has turned the company from a rumor into a legend, and as you march deeper into the Anatolian interior, you feel like the spearhead of a hostile takeover. The landscape changes from the lush, coastal greens to a rugged, sun-scorched plateau of ochre and dust. Your corporate headquarters, the baggage train, has grown into a massive, rolling city of wagons, families, and livestock that follows the fighting men like a shadow. You are no longer just clearing out raiders. You are reclaiming territory that hasn't seen a Byzantine official in decades. The Anatolian juggernaut is rolling, and you are the heavy iron at its front. You've traded the sea breeze for a constant coat of fine white dust that settles into the creases of your skin and turns your hair into a stiff, gray mane. As you move through the interior, you witness the Catalan method applied to logistics. It's a mainstream historical fact that the company managed to relieve the city of Philadelphia, modern-day Alasahir, which had been under a brutal Turkish siege. When you arrive, the gates swing open and the people treat you like gods descended from Olympus. But even as you accept their cheers, you notice the accountants of the company already assessing the city's wealth. Roger de Flor doesn't just liberate, he secures the revenue stream. You help establish blockades and secure the trade routes that connect these inland hubs to the coast. You are building a corridor of Catalan influence, ensuring that the client, the emperor, sees his provinces back, but under the management of the company. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history, often discussed by the campfires regarding your diet during this march. Legend has it that the Almogavars developed a taste for a specific type of fermented Anatolian mare's milk, which they claimed gave them the stamina to march 30 miles a day in the heat. Whether it was the milk or just the sheer stubbornness of the Spanish character, your pace is relentless. You probably would unsurvive the dehydration of these high plains. If you were unconditioned to the harshness of the Iberian meseta, you've learned to find water in the dry beds of summer creeks and to hunt the wild game that scuttles through the scrub. You are becoming as much a part of this landscape as the hawks circling overhead, watching for the next merger of steel. However, as the juggernaut rolls on, the friction of the occupation begins to heat up. You aren't just fighting Turks, you are managing a disgruntled local population. You notice that the Greek villagers are beginning to look at your protection fees with the same resentment they felt for the Turkish tributes. To you, it's just business. The company needs grain, wine, and gold to keep the gears turning. To them, you are a localized locust swarm with better armor. Historians still argue whether the Catalan Company's requisitioning of supplies was a strategic necessity or a systematic pillaging that ultimately destabilized the region further. From your perspective, leaning against your spear while a farmer hands over his last sack of flour, it's simply a matter of the contract being fulfilled. The emperor isn't sending supply wagons, so the land must provide the operational budget. You reach the heights of the Taurus Mountains, looking down into the vast plains of Cilicia. The scale of your conquest is staggering. In a matter of months, a few thousand mercenaries have done what the entire Byzantine military failed to do for a generation. You see Roger de Flor at the head of the column, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. He isn't just looking at the next battle, he's looking at the map of a potential empire. There are whispers among the Adelids that Roger is considering carving out his own kingdom, Catalan, east, that would act as a permanent frontier state. You realize you aren't just an employee anymore. You are a pioneer in a new colony. The equity you were promised is beginning to look like actual land, but the market is never stable. The further you get from Constantinople, the more the rumors of palace intrigue grow. You hear from messengers that the emperor's son, Michael, is furious about your success. Every city you liberate is a reminder of his own inadequacy. You are the disruptive startup that has made the legacy firm look obsolete, and the legacy firm is starting to plot a hostile restructuring. You sit by the fire at night, counting your share of the Philadelphia spoils intricate gold jewelry and heavy silver plates, and you wonder if you ever get to spend it in a land that is untet war. You've hoarded your dividends well, but in this business, your life is the only asset that truly matters, and the insurance premiums are getting higher with every mile. One afternoon, you come across an abandoned Turkish outpost. Inside, you find a collection of maps and scrolls that detail the routes of the Silk Road. It's a reminder that you are standing at the crossroads of the world. The great Catalan Company isn't just a military unit. It's a bridge between the dying West and the rising East. You feel a strange sense of pride. You're a rugged Almogavar, a man the nobles of Europe would call a savage, yet here you are, dictating the fate of ancient cities. You've proven that a corporation of free men, bound by a contract and led by a visionary, can outperform any king. The sun sets over the Anatolian plateau, casting long purple shadows that stretch toward the coast. The juggernaut halts for the night, the thousands of wagons forming a defensive circle that looks like a wooden crown upon the earth. You take your post on the perimeter, the iron of your koltel cold against your palm. The air is silent, save for the distant howl of a wolf. You are miles from home, deep in a land that wants to swallow you whole, yet you've never felt more powerful. The Anatolian branch of the company is at its peak. But as you watch the flickering lights of the camp, you can't help but feel that the market is about to turn. The higher the rise, the more spectacular the crash. And in the world of the forgotten archives, the crash is usually written in blood. The march through the Anatolian interior isn't just a feat of endurance. It's a daily exercise in the rigid, almost monastic discipline that keeps the company from collapsing into a mere rabble. You've traded the chaotic, individualistic life of a frontier scout for the synchronized rhythm of a corporate machine. Every morning, long before the sun even thinks about touching the peaks of the Taurus Mountains, the camp is alive. There is no bugle call here. Instead, you hear the rhythmic drumming of spear butts on the earth. You rise from your bedroll, your joints popping like dry twigs, and begin the ritual of the iron discipline. You check your feet first. Blisters are a bigger threat to your quarterly performance than Turkish arrows, and then you check your steel. The daily life of an Almogavar is built on a unique communal structure. You belong to a kola, a small cell of men who eat, sleep, and fight together. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Almogavars lived in these tight-knit units, creating a bond of horizontal loyalty that was far stronger than the vertical loyalty of a knight to his lord. In your kola, everything is shared. When you acquire a stray goat or a sack of olives from a mountain village, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the unit. This collective living ensures that no one starves while another feasts, and it creates a terrifying cohesion on the battlefield. You aren't just fighting for Roger de Flor, you're refighting for the 5 men who are currently arguing over whose turn it is to grind the grain for tonight's porridge. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore regarding the hygiene of the company or lack thereof. It was whispered by the Byzantines that the Almogavars never washed their tunics because they believed the accumulated sweat and grime of victory acted as a sort of natural armor against the elements. While you certainly don't smell like a rose garden, the reality is more practical. You simply do and have the time or the excess water for vanity. You are a lean operation. You carry only what is essential. You probably wouldn't survive the olfactory shock of your own barracks if you were unso used to it. But there's a certain pride in that scent. It's the smell of a man who hasn't been downsized by life. Discipline in the company is maintained through a blend of democratic consensus and swift, brutal justice. If a man steals from his own kola or shows cowardice during a merger with the enemy, the punishment isn't a fine or a stern talking to, it's liquidation. The company's internal laws, based on the ancient customs of the Aragonese frontiers, are absolute. You've seen a man executed for a minor desertion, his body left as a marker for the rest of the column. It's a harsh employee handbook, but it's the only thing that keeps thousands of professional killers from turning on each other in the middle of a wasteland. Historians still argue whether the Almogavars were truly as disciplined as the primary sources suggest, or if their order was simply a byproduct of being perpetually surrounded by enemies. From where you stand, it feels like a bit of both, Fear of the outside world is a powerful motivator for internal cooperation. You spend your days practicing the awaken the iron drill. You strike your flint against your blade until the sparks fly, a ritual that is half maintenance, half psychological warfare. You also practice the javelin unduk. The Almogavar style of combat relies on throwing the heavy ascona with enough force to pierce a shield and then immediately closing the distance with the coltel. It's a high-intensity workout that leaves your shoulders burning. You are being trained to operate at a higher frequency than the traditional feudal soldier. While a knight is encumbered by his status and his heavy gear, you are a streamlined predator. You move faster, hit harder, and cost the client significantly less in maintenance fees. The communal nature of the company extends to the HR department, the wives and families traveling in the rear. These women aren't just camp followers. They are the backbone of the logistics division. They mend the leather, cook the communal meals, and nurse the wounded. You see them every evening when the column halts, their presence a reminder that the company is a society, not just a troop. It's a mobile village, a sovereign nation on wheels. This domesticity amidst the violence is jarring, but necessary. It gives you something to fight for beyond the next bag of coins. It reminds you that the equity you are earning is meant to build a future, not just pay for a night in a tavern. As the juggernaut rolls further south, you find yourself sitting around the fire with men who have been fighting since the Sicilian Wars 20 years ago. They tell stories of the old days, but they always bring it back to the present. They talk about Roger de Flor with a mixture of reverence and wariness. He is the CEO who has brought them to this land of milk and honey, but they know that a leader is only as good as his next contract. You listen to the low murmur of their voices, the sound of the wind whipping through the dry grass, and the distant braying of a mule. You are part of something unprecedented in the medieval world, a self-governing, self-sustaining military corporation. The iron discipline isn't just about following orders, it's about a shared understanding of survival. You know that if the man to your left falters, your own shares in life are significantly devalued. You look at your calloused hands, the dirt beneath your fingernails, and the notched edge of your blade. You aren't a servant of the emperor, you are a partner in the great Catalan Company. And as you lay your head down on the hard Anatolian earth, you feel a strange sense of security. You are surrounded by thousands of men who are just as hungry, just as tired, and just as dangerous as you are. The discipline of the company is the only law that matters, and tonight, the law is silent. The high of the Philadelphia liberation begins to sour as the practicalities of a long-term consultancy set in. You are marching through the Meander Valley, and the air is thick with more than just the summer heat. There's a rising scent of resentment coming from the very people you were sent to save. It turns out that having a mercenary corporation as your local security force is a bit like hiring a private equity firm to manage a family farm. You get results, but you might lose the farm in the process. The Greek citizens of Philadelphia and the surrounding towns are starting to realize that the great Catalan Company doesn't work for tips. You've been requisitioning supplies with a zeal that borders on the predatory. To you, a requisition is just an operational necessity. To the Greek farmer, watching his last 2 goats being led away to the company cookfires, it looks a lot like a robbery. The friction in this campaign isn't just about food, it's about a fundamental clash of corporate cultures. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Almogavars and the local Byzantine populations had a relationship that was, at best, toxic. You don't speak their language, you don't respect their soft, urban ways, and you certainly don't follow their laws. You follow the company's statutes. When a local magistrate tries to complain about a dispute over a tavern bill or a missing bale of silk, your adelids simply point to the contract with the emperor. You are effectively above the law because you are the law in this frontier zone. You probably wouldn't survive the legal backlash of a modern lawsuit. But here, the only court of appeals is the edge of your blade. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history from this period involving the coin of Philadelphia. Legend has it that the city's elders, desperate to get the company to move on to the next province, struck a series of commemorative coins that were supposedly blessed to bring the bearer luck only if they were at least 10 miles outside the city walls. Whether or not these get-to-toff-free tokens actually existed, the sentiment was real. You've noticed that when you enter a village, the windows are shuttered and the streets are empty. You aren't the liberating heroes of the previous month. You are the unforeseen cost of survival. You sit in a town square eating a stolen pomegranate, and watch the locals scurry by with their heads down. It's a lonely feeling, being the most powerful man in the room and the most hated. Historians still argue whether Roger de Flor could have controlled his men better, or if the pillage-spay model was the only way to keep the company from dissolving. You've seen Roger try to balance the scales, but even a CEO can stop 5,000 hungry shareholders from liquidating a local pantry when the official Byzantine payroll is late. And it is late. Again, the emperor's emissaries arrive with excuses instead of gold, claiming that the transaction fees and logistical delays in Constantinople are to blame. This is where the friction turns into a full-blown labor dispute. You hear the men grumbling in the ranks. If the client isn't going to pay the invoice, the company will start taking payment. In kind, which usually means anything that is nailed down in the Meander Valley. The Philadelphia campaign becomes a slog of asset management. You find yourself spending more time guarding supply wagons from angry peasants than you do fighting Turks. There's a particular skirmish near a village where the locals actually took up pitchforks to defend their grain silo. You had to drive them off, and the look of pure, cold hatred in their eyes stayed with you long after the grain was loaded onto your carts. You realize that you've become the villain in their story. In the business of the forgotten archives, the liberator and the oppressor often use the same boots. It just depends on who's paying for the leather. You wonder if the brand damage the company is sustaining here will eventually make you unemployable in the rest of Christendom. The tension reaches a boiling point during a meeting with the local Byzantine governors. They accuse the company of being worse than the Turks, a phrase that stings even your hardened heart. After all, you've bled for these borders. You've seen your friends buried in this dry earth. You feel like the contractor who finished the house on time and under budget, only to have the homeowner complain about the muddy footprints on the carpet. The service level agreement is breaking down. Roger de Flor remains calm, but you can see the tightening of his jaw. He knows that his employees are reaching their limit. A mercenary with an empty stomach is just an outlaw with a better resume, and the line between the two is getting thinner by the day. As the column moves toward the coast for the winter, you pass through lands you previously secured. They are eerily quiet. The market has been thoroughly disrupted. You've pushed the Turks back into the mountains, but you've left a vacuum of resentment behind you. You realize that the Catalan Company is a magnificent hammer, but the Byzantine Empire is a fragile porcelain vase. You were hired to fix the cracks, but every time you swing the hammer, you create 10 more. You sharpen your coaltail by the light of a fire fueled by a local's fence posts. And you think about the long-term sustainability of this business model. It's great for a quick turnaround, but it's hell on the client relationship. The sun dips below the hills of the Meander, casting a long, bloody light over the valley. You wrap your cloak tighter against the evening chill, feeling the weight of the surplus goods in your pack. The Philadelphia campaign is technically a success. The KP is were met, the enemy was neutralized, but the atmosphere in the camp is anything but celebratory. You are a corporation in a hostile environment, and your customer base is praying for your bankruptcy. As you drift off to sleep, you hear the distant chime of a church bell from a village you just taxed. It sounds less like a prayer and more like a warning. The great Catalan Company is still the most dangerous force in Asia Minor. But even a juggernaut has to worry about the friction that eventually slows it down. The winter of 1304 finds the great Catalan Company encamped at Magnesia, and for the first time since you crossed the Bosphorus, the momentum of the juggernaut has ground to a screeching halt. You aren't staring down a Turkish horde or a Byzantine phalanx, you are staring at a locked granary door. Magnesia was supposed to be your regional branch office, a secure base where you could store the massive assets you've accumulated during the campaign. Instead, it has become the site of a logistical nightmare. The local Greek governor, perhaps sensing the shifting winds in Constantinople, has decided to freeze your accounts. He has locked the city gates, sequestered the company's treasure, and most importantly, is refusing to release the grain. You find yourself on the outside of the walls, looking in at your own paycheck. This isn't a battle, it's a standoff over a breach of contract. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Magnesia incident was a turning point for the company's relationship with the Byzantine locals. While you and your cola huddle in a makeshift camp of tents and linus, the citizens on the ramparts look down at you with a mixture of smug satisfaction and terror. They've finally found a way to hurt you, by cutting off the operating expenses. You probably wouldn't survive the biting, wet cold of an Anatolian winter without proper rations, and the frustration in the camp is palpable. You spend your days pacing the perimeter of the city, your stomach growling, a rhythmic accompaniment to the sharpening of your blades. You aren't just hungry for food, you're hungry for the settlement you're owed. There is a quirky bit of fringe history regarding the Magnesia siege that suggests the Almogavars tried to use trained hunting hawks to fly messages or, perhaps even small incendiary devices over the walls to intimidate the governor. While the image of a mercenary air force is entertaining, the reality was much more grounded and gritty. You and your comrades have started sourcing your supplies from the surrounding countryside with a desperate ferocity. Any farm within a day's march has been picked clean, leaving a ring of desolation around the city. You've become a parasite that is slowly killing its host. You find yourself boiling leather straps just to have something to chew on, a culinary experience you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Historians still argue whether the governor of Magnesia was acting on secret orders from the emperor's son, Michael Ix, or if he was simply a local official who had finally reached his limit with Catalan arrogance. Regardless of the motive, the supply chain disruption is total. Roger de Flor is furious. He sees this not just as a local dispute, but as a corporate sabotage. He spends his hours in his tent drafting increasingly angry emails, or rather, parchment missives to the emperor, demanding the immediate liquidation of the governor's head. You see him pacing, his purple mantle trailing in the mud, and you realize that even the great duke is powerless against a locked door when he doesn't want to burn the very office he hopes to own. The atmosphere in the camp has turned toxic. Without a clear enemy to fight, the shareholders are starting to look at each other with suspicion. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, you'd trade a gallon of it for a single sack of dry flour right now. The discipline that held the company together in the heat of battle is fraying under the cold pressure of hunger. Brawls break out over a handful of olives or a dry crust of bread. You realize that the mercenary corporation model has a fatal flaw. It requires constant growth and constant invoicing. The moment the cash flow stops, the entire entity begins to eat itself. You sleep with your coltel unsheathed, not because you fear a Greek sortie, but because you don't entirely trust the man in the tent next to you. One night, a group of Almogavars decides to take direct action. They attempt to scale a section of the wall under the cover of a rainstorm, hoping to seize the granary by force. You watch the flickering torches from a distance as the attempt fails, miserably the Greeks have been, reinforced by local militias who are fighting for their very lives. The corporate takeover has been repelled by a hostile board of residents. This failure only deepens the gloom. You are the finest infantry in the world, the conquerors of the Turks, and you are being held at bay by a group of angry merchants and bakers. It's a humiliating downsizing of your reputation. Eventually, word arrives from the capital. The emperor, desperate to avoid a full-scale civil war in the middle of his empire, orders the company to break camp and move toward the Gallipoli Peninsula. It's a lateral move, a way to get you away from the sensitive inland cities and closer to the European side of the empire. You are told that the invoice will be settled there. You pack your meager belongings, your ribs showing through your skin, and prepare for the march. You leave Magnesia with your pockets empty and your heart full of a new, cold bitterness. The Greeks aren't your clients anymore. They are the competition that needs to be crushed. As the column snakes away from the city, you look back at the walls of Magnesia. The governor is likely celebrating his victory, but you know better. You know that the company doesn't forget a bad debt. You've learned a valuable lesson in market dynamics this winter. A city that won't yuan feed you is just a city that has yuan been burned yet. The forgotten archives will record this as a period of rest. But you know it was the moment the Catalan vengeance began to germinate in the dark, hungry corners of your mind. You turn your back on the city and head toward the Hellespont. The corporate restructuring of the Byzantine Empire entering its most violent phase yet. The invitation to the banquet in Adrianople feels like a Lunga Verdu bonus, but the air in the hall is far too cold for a room full of steaming meat and expensive wine. You aren't inside the hall yourself. You are part of the security detail stationed in the courtyard. But you can see the silhouette of Roger de Flor through the arched windows. He had been summoned by Michael IX, the emperor's son, for a performance review to settle the company's mounting invoices and finalize his new title as Caesar of the Empire. It was supposed to be the ultimate promotion, the merger of the Catalan sword with the Byzantine throne. But as you watch the shadows of the servants moving behind the glass, you notice they aren't carrying platters of fruit. They are moving with the synchronized, lethal grace of men carrying concealed steel. The banquet is a trap of Shakespearean proportions. It's a mainstream historical fact that on April 30th, 1305, Roger de Flor and his top executives, over 100 Catalan nobles and officers, were brutally assassinated during this peace summit. While Roger was toasted as a hero of the empire, the Alan mercenaries, who were on Michael's secret payroll, burst from behind the tapestries. You hear the first scream a high, sharp sound that cuts through the melodic Greek music like a serrated blade. Then comes the crash of silver platters and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. You probably wouldn't survive the next 60 seconds if you were inside that room. It was a hostile termination in the most literal sense possible. The courtyard erupts into chaos. You draw your coltel, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The banquet wasn't just for the leadership. It was a coordinated divestment of the entire company. Byzantine soldiers and Alan horsemen pour out of the barracks their orders clear. Liquidate the assets. You find yourself back to back with two of your Cola brothers, the sparks flying from your blades as you awaken the iron one last time in this cursed city. There is a quirky bit of fringe history that says Michael IX watched the massacre from a hidden gallery, clutching a relic of St. Demetrius and praying for the company's soul even as he ordered their throats cut. Whether he prayed or not, he certainly didn't hesitate. He thought that by killing the CEO, he could kill the corporation. He was wrong. Historians still argue whether Roger de Flor was incredibly naive to walk into such an obvious trap, or if his own ego had convinced him that he was truly too big to fail. You see the blood of your leaders beginning to seep out from under the heavy oak doors of the banquet hall, staining the white marble of the courtyard. The board of directors is gone in a single afternoon. In any other medieval army, this would be the end. The men would scatter, the banners would fall, and the mercenaries would flee for the hills. But the great Catalan Company isn't a traditional army, it's a collective. The operating system of the Almogavars is built for redundancy. You don't need a head to know how to bite. You fight your way toward the city gates, the air thick with the smell of scorched silk and copper. The corporate culture of the company, that fierce communal discipline you've lived by for years, kicks into an automatic, vengeful gear. You don't scream for mercy, you scream for the company. You manage to reach the horse lines, cutting the throat of a Byzantine groom who tries to stop you, and leap onto a stray stallion. As you gallop out of Adrianople, you look back and see the smoke rising from the palace. They've murdered your CEO, but they've also voided the last shred of the contract. You are no longer employees. You are the most dangerous, unclaimed liabilities in the history of the Mediterranean. The ride back to the company's main camp at Gallipoli is a blur of exhaustion and cold fury. You are one of the few who escape the meeting, and as you ride into the camp and deliver the news, a silence falls over the thousands of men that is more terrifying than any battle cry. It's the silence of a market that has just bottomed out. You see the wives of the murdered leaders tearing their hair, the Attalids gripping their spears until their knuckles turn white. Michael X thought he was performing a surgical strike to remove a threat, but he has actually just removed the only man who could keep the wolves on a leash. Without Roger de Flor to negotiate, there is no one left to talk to. There is only the settlement of the blood debt. There is no debate about the next move. The shareholders meet in a grim emergency session. They elect new leaders on the spot, shifting the management structure with a fluidity that would baffle a Byzantine bureaucrat. You sit by your fire, cleaning the blood of a client off your sleeves, and realize that the world has changed. The forgotten archives often focus on the glory of Roger's rise, but the true story of the company begins here, in the ashes of his murder. You aren't fighting for pay anymore. You're fighting for a concept. You are the Catalan vengeance personified. The sun sets over the Hellespont, casting a deep crimson light across the water that looks suspiciously like the floor of the banquet hall. You wrap a bandage around a shallow cut on your arm, feeling a strange, hollow calm. The Byzantine Empire thinks it has solved its Catalan problem. In reality, they have just released a monster from its cage. You look at the men around you, hardened, hungry, and now completely unmoored from the law of kings. The restructuring is over. The liquidation of the Byzantine Empire is about to begin. You grab your javelins and prepare for a war that has no rules, no contracts, and no end in sight. The company is dead. Long live the company. The silence that followed the news of the Adrianople massacre didn't last long. It was quickly replaced by the rhythmic, terrifying sound of iron hitting stone. You are back at the base in Gallipoli, but the atmosphere has shifted from a military camp to a frantic, vengeful forge. You aren't just a soldier anymore. You are a cell in a wounded organism that has decided the only way to heal is to burn everything in its path. The Catalan vengeance, the Venjança Catalana, is no longer a threat. It is the new corporate mission statement. Michael Ickes thought he could terminate the contract by killing the CEO, but he failed to realize that the great Catalan Company is a decentralized entity. You and your brothers in arms immediately elect liquidators to lead you, and the first order of business is to declare war on the entire Byzantine Empire. This is a mainstream historical fact that still shocks scholars. A few thousand mercenaries, stranded in a hostile land and surrounded by enemies, chose not to flee, but to challenge an ancient empire to a duel of annihilation. You watch as the company's new leadersmen like Berengar confirmly defy the emperor. You don't just send a letter, you tear up your Byzantine banners and hoist the 4 red bars of Aragon. You probably would unsurvive the sheer audacity of this moment if you did unhave the corporate assets to back it up. You spend your nights raiding the surrounding Thracian countryside, turning the breadbasket of Constantinople into a blackened wasteland. If the emperor won't pay your wages in gold, you will take them in the form of every vine, every sheep, and every life within reach of your ascanas. There is a quirky fringe tidbit regarding the vengeance that claims the Almogavars became so feared during this period that mothers in Thrace would whisper your name to quiet their children, and that some Byzantine soldiers believed you had made a pact with the devil to survive without a supply line. The reality is more impressive. You've become manskers of resource acquisition. You move through the landscape like a predatory fire, leaving nothing for the enemy to use. You've learned to live entirely off the hostile takeover of local villages. You sit by a fire fueled by the furniture of a provincial villa, roasting a pig that belonged to a Greek magistrate this morning, and you feel a dark, cold satisfaction. The client relationship is officially dead. The systematic devastation of Thrace is a brutal market correction. For 2 years, you turn the region into a dead zone. Historians still argue whether the Catalan vengeance was a strategic necessity to prevent the Byzantines from massing an army, or if it was simply a collective psychotic break fueled by grief and betrayal. From your perspective, it's a matter of operational security. Every farm you burn is one less source of rations for Michael IX's troops. Every road you block is a supply chain broken. You are the disruptor that has become a destroyer. You've seen the smoke of a dozen villages rising on the horizon simultaneously, a grim tally of the company's quarterly progress. But the Byzantines aren't just watching from the sidelines. Michael IX, desperate to fix his mistake, gathers a massive force of Alan's Turks and Greeks to crush you at the Battle of April. You find yourself standing in the line, looking out at an army that outnumbers you at least 5 to 1. You should be terrified, but you aren't. You remember the banquet hall. You remember the blood on the marble. You strike your kotel against a rock, the sparks flying in the morning air. Despera faro. The cry goes up, and it's louder than it's ever been. You don't wait for them to charge. You run. You move with a ferocity that defies traditional military logic. You aren't fighting for a king, you're refighting for the man next to you and the ghost of the man who led you. The Battle of Apros is a slaughter. The Byzantine lines, built on the legacy model of rigid formations and wavering loyalty, collapse under the weight of your aggression. You see the Alan mercenaries, the very men who carried out the murders in Adrianople, and flee when they see the Almogavars coming. You don't let them go. In the restructuring of the company, there is no room for mercy. You hunt them through the fields, your short sword doing the grim work of an auditor. By sunset, the emperor's son has fled the field, wounded and humiliated. You've proven that the corporation is more than its leadership. It is a spirit of survival that cannot be downsized by a dagger in the dark. After the battle, the company returns to Gallipoli to rebrand. You've turned the peninsula into a fortress. You are no longer just a wandering army. You are a sovereign entity. You have your own laws, your own currency often stamped over Byzantine coins, and your own foreign policy. You've successfully pivoted from a service provider to an independent competitor. You spend your days fortifying the walls, watching the Byzantine navy hover on the horizon like a pack of nervous wolves. They can't stop you, and they can't ignore you. You are a permanent fixture in their nightmares. As you look out over the ruins of Thrace from the cliffs of Gallipoli, you realize that the great Catalan Company has achieved the impossible. You've defied an empire and won. But the cost has been high. The faces of the men in your cola are harder now, the humor replaced by a grim professional coldness. You've become the monsters the world thought you were, and there's no going back to the way things were. The forgotten archives will call this your darkest hour, but you feel a strange, fierce pride. You are the masters of your own destiny, and the Catalan vengeance is just the beginning of the new fiscal year. The Gallipoli Peninsula has become more than just a base. It is the sovereign headquarters of a nation that shouldn't exist. You stand on the rugged cliffs overlooking the Dardanelles, the salt spray of the Hellespont stinging the scars on your face. Below you, the unsubsilling Byzantine shipping lanes are eerily quiet, save for the sleek, predatory shapes of the company's galleys. You've helped turn this narrow strip of land into a fortress state, a mercenary republic carved out of the ribs of an empire that tried to delete you. Every stone you've hauled to the ramparts and every trench you've dug is a statement of permanent residency. The Catalan vengeance has moved from a mobile fire to a settled, burning hearth. You aren't just a soldier of fortune anymore. You are a citizen of a corporate state that answers to no king but its own council. This period is a mainstream historical fact of incredible defiance. For several years, the great Catalan Company operated as a de facto independent power on European soil. While the Byzantine Navy, once the terror of the Mediterranean, attempted to blockade you, they found that a lean operation like yours was impossible to pin down. You've adapted to the sea as quickly as you did to the Anatolian plains. You participate in coastal raids that are less about glory and more about resource harvesting. You probably wouldn't survive the life of a Byzantine sailor trapped in a rotting galley with a captain who hasn't been paid in years, but on a Catalan ship, the incentive structure is clear. If you capture a Genoese merchantman, the cargo is the company bonus. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the Gallipoli state involving the creation of a unique mercenary currency. Since the Byzantine hyperpyron was no longer being deposited into your accounts, the company's blacksmiths allegedly began striking their own tokens from melted-down church plate and captured jewelry. These weren't coins of a kingdom, but coupons of the collective, used to trade for grain and wine within the camp. You carry a few of these in your pouch. The rough edges are a reminder of your self-sufficiency. UVA created a closed economy where the only thing that has value is what the company says has value. It's a bold experiment in monetary independence that would make a central banker's head spin. The internal politics of Gallipoli are as complex as any royal court, but far more transparent. Without Roger de Flor's singular CEO presence, the company is governed by a committee of Adelids and the Council of 12. Historians still argue whether this was a true proto-democracy or simply a military junta, born of necessity. From your perspective, sitting in the assembly and pounding your spear on the ground to vote, it feels like the ultimate employee-owned business. You have a say in where the next raid will strike and how the winter rations will be divided. It's a dangerous, volatile way to live, as promotions are often the result of the previous officer dying in a skirmish or being voted out by a rival faction, but it's yours. Life in the Gallipoli Peninsula isn't all blood and fire, though. You've built a life here. You see the Almogavar children playing in the ruins of ancient Greek towers, and the wives of the company tending to gardens planted in the very trenches meant to defend the city. You've become a disruptive colony in the heart of the old world, but the market is getting crowded. The Byzantines have hired their own mercenaries to counter you, and the local Bulgarian and Serbian kings are starting to look at your fortress state with greedy, nervous eyes. You realize that you can't stay here forever. Gallipoli is a perfect defensive position, but a corporation that doesn't grow is a corporation that dies. The operating costs of maintaining a stationary state are beginning to outweigh the revenue from local raids. You spend your afternoons sharpening your askinas and looking across the water toward the hills of Thrace. You've burned that land so thoroughly that it can no longer support you. The market is exhausted. You hear the rumors in the council meeting talk of moving south toward the rich, untouched lands of Greece. The board is looking for a new territory to acquire. You feel a sense of restlessness in the camp. The Almogavars are hunters, and they've stayed in the blind of Gallipoli for too long. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicily? You'd almost welcome that heat again if it meant moving toward a new horizon. One night, a massive Byzantine fleet attempts a surprise landing under the cover of a moonless sky. You are on watch duty, the cold wind whipping your cloak. You don't sound a trumpet. You simply awaken the iron by striking your blade against the stone wall. The sparks are the only signal the company needs. Within minutes, the ramparts are lined with thousands of men who have lived for nothing but this moment. The hostile takeover is repelled before the first Byzantine boot even touches the sand. You watch the enemy ships retreat into the darkness. And you realize that Gallipoli isn't just a fortress seats, a brand. UVV made it so expensive to attack you that the empire would rather let you rot than try to evict you. As the sun rises over the Hellespont, painting the water in the colors of a bruised plum, the order finally comes down. The company is liquidating its holdings in Gallipoli. You are moving out. You aren't retreating. You are relocating the corporate headquarters. You pack your few possessions, including a small piece of marble you carved into the shape of a Spanish bull, and prepare to board the ships. You've held this land against the world for years, but now the forgotten archives are calling you further south. You leave the fires burning in the hearths of Gallipoli, so the enemy thinks you restill their final. Cheeky bit of misleading marketing as you sail toward the next chapter of your conquest. The departure from Gallipoli is not a retreat. It is a strategic divestment of a depleted territory. You stand on the deck of a transport ship, watching the smoke from your own abandoned campfires spiral into the Thracian sky a final, mocking away message to the Byzantine Emperor. The Great March has begun, and the company is moving like a massive, iron-scaled serpent through the Balkans. You aren't just an army on the move. You are a wandering sovereign state, a mobile corporation looking for a new market to disrupt. The lands of Thrace and Macedonia have been audited to the point of bankruptcy, and the Council of 12 has decided that the southern horizon holds the next great investment. You feel the change in the air as you move further from the Hellespont. The wind is warmer, carrying the scent of wild thyme and the distant, salty promise of the Aegean. This march is a mainstream historical fact of incredible endurance. For over a year, the great Catalan Company trekked through the rugged heart of the Balkans, defying the legacy powers of the region. You find yourself navigating the narrow passes of the Rhodope Mountains, where the terrain is so vertical you swear you reclimbing toward heaven just to find a place to sleep. You probably would unsurvive the logistical nightmare of this march if the company had unperfected the art of nomadic infrastructure. Every night, the wagons form a rolling boardroom, and every morning, the labor force of Almogavars clears the path with axes and sheer stubborn muscle. You are a self-contained ecosystem of violence and commerce, carrying your families, your blacksmiths, and your accounts receivable in a line that stretches for miles. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore from this trek involving the Iron Mule. Legend says the company's engineers constructed a series of mechanical pulleys and levers so efficient they could lift a fully loaded supply wagon over a mountain cliff in minutes. While likely an exaggeration of your very real engineering skills, it highlights the innovative spirit of the company. You've become masters of the environment because you have to be. There is no support staff waiting for you at the next stop. You sit by a fire in a mountain gorge, sharpening your coltel with a piece of local schist, and realize that you have more in common with the ancient Roman legions than any modern knight. You are building the road as you walk it, and your business plan is written in the dust of the trail. Historians still argue whether the company's decision to move south was a desperate flight from a closing Byzantine trap or a calculated expansion strategy aimed at the wealthy, fractured duchies of Greece. From your perspective, it feels like a bit of both. You've noticed the Byzantine shadow following you small detachments of Greek and Allan scouts, who watch you from the ridges but never dare to close the deal in open battle. They are waiting for you to fail, to starve, or to turn on yourselves. But the corporate culture of the company is at its strongest when the pressure is highest. You share your meager rations of dried mutton and hardtack with the man next to you, knowing that his performance tomorrow is the only thing keeping you alive tonight. The march through Macedonia is a series of hostile takeovers of local resources. You pass by the ruins of Mount Athos, where the monks look down from their cliffside monasteries with a mixture of prayerful dread and silent condemnation. You don't bother them. There's no profit in a pile of old icons in silence. You are looking for the liquid assets grain, livestock, and horses. You find yourself in a constant cycle of negotiation with local Bulgarian and Serbian lords who try to block your path. You don't fight them if you don't have to. Instead, you invoice them for the rite of passage, taking their gold and moving on. You are a predatory state that is too big to stop and too hungry to stay still. As you descend into the plains of Thessaly, the landscape opens up like a fresh ledger. The air is thick and heavy, a reminder of the humidity of the Mediterranean south. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen, again a callback to a time when you were just a mercenary for hire. Now, you are a partner in a global enterprise. You see the adilage at the front of the column pointing toward the Athries Mountains. Beyond them lies the Duchy of Athens, a land currently managed by the Frankish nobility, the descendants of the Crusaders who took Greece a century ago. They represent the old money of the East, and you are the new, aggressive startup coming to challenge their monopoly. The Great March has turned your skin into leather and your heart into a cold, professional stone. You've seen brothers die of fever in the mountain passes and children born in the back of supply wagons. You are no longer the men who left Sicily. You are a new breed of mercenaries. You've survived the betrayal of an emperor and the cold of a Thracian winter, and now you are looking at the blue-chip prize of Greece. You check the laces on your sandals, feeling the familiar grit of the road. The operating costs of this journey have been high, but the projected returns in the south are legendary. The sun sets behind the peaks of Mount Olympus, casting long, godly shadows across the valley. You don't feel like a hero of legend. You feel like a man who has had a proper bath in 3 months, and who is very, very ready for a stable headquarters. The forgotten archives will record this march as a feat of nomadic brilliance, but you just call it another day at the office. As you lay your head down on the damp Thessalian grass, you hear the distant, rhythmic thud of the night watch. The company is still moving. The market of Greece is just over the next ridge, and you are ready to make your first bid. The dust of the Great March finally begins to settle as you descend into the fertile plains of Boeotia. Ahead of you lies a new landscape, dotted with the jagged ruins of antiquity and the sturdy stone keeps of the Frankish lords. You have reached the borders of the Duchy of Athens, and for the first time in years, the company isn't looking for a fight, it's looking for a long-term lease. Waiting for you is Walter of Brienne, the Duke of Athens. He's a man of high lineage and even higher ambition, and he looks at your travel-worn, iron-hardened ranks with the eyes of a desperate venture capitalist. He needs a specialized workforce to clear out his rivals in neighboring Thessaly, and you need a corporate headquarters that isn't a tent in a mud pit. It feels like the perfect merger. Walter is the classic legacy CEO. He's refined, speaks fluent French, and believes that because he has the title, he has the control. He offers the company a contract that seems almost too good to be true. High wages, steady supplies, and a permanent business park on his frontier. It's a mainstream historical fact that in 1310, the Catalan Company entered the service of the Duchy of Athens, successfully reclaiming over 30 castles for the Duke in a matter of months. You move through the Greek landscape like a professional cleaning crew, liquidating Walter's enemies with a speed that leaves him both delighted and deeply unnerved. You probably would unsurvive the social hierarchy of his court. Still the man who boils leather for snacks but on the battlefield. You are the Duke's premium asset. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history from this honeymoon period, suggesting that the Almogavars and the Frankish knights tried to hold a corporate team-building tournament to celebrate their alliance. The story goes that the Catalans showed up on foot with their javelins, while the knights arrived in full plate on their chargers. When a knight challenged an Almogavar to a friendly joust, the Spaniard supposedly sidestepped the horse and awoke the iron so loudly that the stallion bolted into a nearby olive grove. Whether or not the tournament happened, the cultural gap was real. You see the knights as shiny, expensive, and slow. They see you as a dangerous, unwashed necessity. You spend your nights in the shadow of the Duke's castles, sharpening your coltel and wondering when the second phase of the contract will kick in. Historians still argue whether Walter of Brienne ever intended to pay the full invoice, or if he was simply using the company as a disposable tool to be discarded once the heavy lifting was done. You've seen this movie before in Constantinople, in Magnesia, in Adrian. The client always loves the mercenary when the enemy is at the gate, but they start looking at the overhead the moment the gate is secured. By the end of the first 6 months, the Duke has his castles back, and suddenly, his treasury is feeling a bit light. He offers to pay for only 200 of your best men, and tells the rest of the 5,000 shareholders to seek employment elsewhere. It's a classic mass layoff. And in the world of the Catalan Company, a layoff is a declaration of war. The labor dispute at the heart of the Athenian contract turns sour with breathtaking speed. Walter isn't just trying to downsize the company. He's trying to evict a sovereign entity from his land without paying the severance package. You find yourself back in your cola, sitting around a fire on the outskirts of the Duke's territory, watching the Frankish banners flutter on the horizon. The merger has failed, and the hostile takeover is the only option left on the table. You feel a strange sense of relief. The life of a regular employee never really suited the Almogavars anyway. You are disruptors, not staff. You begin to sharpen your askanas with a renewed vigor, knowing that the Duke's premium assets are about to become his primary liabilities. You spend the weeks leading up to the inevitable restructuring, scouting the terrain near the Cephissus River. You notice the way the Duke is gathering the elite of the Frankish knighthood men from across the Morea and even from France, all eager to prove that chivalry can beat corporate efficiency. To you, they look like a collection of very expensive, very shiny targets. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicily. You'd almost want to offer some to the knights. The Greek sun is going to be the least of their problems once the Catalan vengeance finds its footing in the Athenian soil. The forgotten archives often paint Walter as a victim of his own hubris. But you see him as a manager who forgot that you never, ever shortchange the men who know exactly how much your head is worth. The tension in the air is thick, like the moments before a summer thunderstorm breaks over the Acropolis. You are no longer contractors for the Duke. You are the competitors who are about to occupy the market. The company's council meets in a grim, silent session, deciding that if the Duke won't give you the land he promised, you'll simply take the land he lives on. You watch the supply wagons being fortified and the women and children being moved to the rear. This isn't just a battle, it's a claim for damages. You've done the work, you've secured the castles, and now you're here to collect the final payment. As the sun sets over the Boeotian plains, casting long golden shadows toward the city of Athens, you feel the familiar cold weight of your javelins. You are part of an organization that has outlived emperors and dukes, and you are untabowed to be retired by a man who thinks his blood is bluer than yours. The employment under the Duke of Athens is over, and the sovereign acquisition of Greece is about to begin. You lay your head down on the hard Greek earth, the soft hum of the night watch providing a comforting background noise. Tomorrow, the audit of the Frankish knighthood begins, and you have a feeling the closing costs are going to be astronomical. The transition from employee to competitor is completed not with a signed document, but with the rhythmic sound of 1,000 shovels biting into the soft, silty earth of the Cephissus Valley. You are standing in the marshes of Boeotia, your skin caked in a gray-green slurry that smells of stagnant water and ancient decay. The Duke of Athens is approaching with the management of the Frankish world, hundreds of knights in heavy plate armor, their colorful banners snapping in the breeze like corporate flags at a trade show. They think they are coming to a battle. You know they are coming to a liquidation. You've spent the last several weeks performing some very specific site preparation. You aren't just an infantryman today. You are an engineer of a literal death trap. It is a mainstream historical fact that before the Battle of Hamiros in 1311, the Catalan Company spent days diverting the waters of the Cephissus River to flood the fields directly in front of their lines. You've been digging irrigation ditches, but not for the sake of agriculture. You've turned the seemingly solid grassy plain into a quagmire of hidden mud, a sinkhole for the Frankish heavy cavalry. You probably wouldn't. Survive a hidden charge from 1,600 elite knights on dry land, the sheer kinetic energy of those horses would shatter your line like glass. But the company doesn't play by the rules of legacy warfare. You are disrupting the very physics of the battlefield. You wipe the sweat and muck from your brow, looking out at the lush, deceptively stable green field you've just sabotaged. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe lore that says the Almogavars actually planted sharp olive stakes and even caltrops made of sharpened bone beneath the surface of the swamp to further disable the horses. While the mud alone was likely enough, the story fits the Catalan brand of being terrifyingly thorough. You've been told that the Frankish knights are laughing in their camp, calling you diggers and peasants who are too afraid to meet them in the open. You let them laugh. You remember that team-building tournament that never happened. This is the real event. You check the tension on your javelins and wait. You've built the infrastructure for their destruction. Now you just have to wait for the clients to arrive. Historians still argue whether Walter of Brienne was truly so arrogant that he ignored the obvious signs of the flooding, or if the company's engineering was so subtle that the field looked dry until the first horse hit the muck. From your position on the slightly elevated ridge, the market strategy is clear. You are baiting the most expensive military force in the world into a capital-intensive mistake. You watch the Duke's army assemble the cream of the French nobility in Greece, men whose ancestors conquered Constantinople. They represent old money, and they are about to invest everything they have into a swamp. You feel a cold, professional excitement. This is the product launch that will determine if the company owns the future of Greece or dies in its mud. The engineering of the swamps is a testament to the company's collective intelligence. Every man in your cola knew exactly where to dig and which dikes to break to ensure the water saturated the soil without creating visible pools. You've turned the landscape into a dark pool of liability. You see the Duke at the head of his column, his golden spurs glinting in the sun. He looks like a man who expects a quick victory and a celebratory banquet. You look at your mud-stained hands and your notched coltel, and you realize that chivalry is about to have a very bad day on the stock exchange of war. You take your place in the front rank, the ground beneath your boots firm and dry, while 30 paces ahead, the trap is set. As the Frankish trumpets sound the charge, the noise is deafening, the thunder of thousands of hooves and the clatter of steel. They are coming at you at full gallop, a wall of iron and pride. You don't flinch, you don't even raise your javelins yet. You wait for the market to correct itself. You watch the lead knights, their lances leveled, their eyes fixed on your Lastidus ranks, and then the crash happens. The first line of horses hits the saturated ground and simply sinks the thunder of the charge, turns into a chaotic splashing and the high-pitched screams of animals in panic. The elite workforce of the Duchy of Athens has just hit a liquidity crisis. You see the knights behind them trying to stop, but the momentum of the charge is too great. They pile into the back of their own men, a tangled heap of silk, steel, and mud. It's a chain reaction of failure. The company's engineering has turned a military engagement into a logistical disaster for the enemy. You finally raise your ascanas, the iron tips catching the light. You aren't just soldiers anymore. You are the collection agents coming to settle the debt. Walter of Brienne tried to dodge. You probably wouldn't survive the guilt of what comes next if you weren't an Almogavar, but you've been outsourced and downsized for the last time. The sun is high over the Cephasus now, and the market is wide open. You move forward, not in a frantic rush, but in a disciplined, professional sweep. You are stepping onto the firm ground you carefully preserved, looking down at the high-value targets struggling in the muck. The engineering of the swamps was the most successful project the company has ever undertaken. You take a deep breath of the humid air, feeling the familiar weight of the iron discipline in your limbs. The Duke's reign is sinking into the mud of his own making, and the great Catalan Company is ready to acquire the remaining assets. The sound of the Battle of Hamiros is something that will haunt the forgotten archives of chivalry forever. It isn't the clean ring of steel on steel. It is the wet, sucking thud of a 1,000-pound horse hitting a bog at 30 miles per hour. You stand on the firm ridge, looking down at the disaster you engineered. The elite Frankish knighthood, the descendants of the men who conquered empires, are now a thrashing, metallic mess in the Cephasus muck. Their horses are buried to their chests, their heavy lances are useless, and their dignity is being swallowed by the silt. You watch as Walter of Brienne, the man who tried to fire you without pay, struggles to keep his mount upright. It is a mainstream historical fact that almost the entire nobility of the Duchy of Athens was wiped out in a single afternoon because they underestimated the labor force they had previously hired. You don't wait for them to recover. The order goes out, liquidate. You and your cola move down from the ridge. You aren't charging. You are wading into a target-trick environment. The Almogavars move through the mud with the ease of men born to the marshes, while the knights are trapped in their premium armor like sardines in a tin. You probably wouldn't survive a fair fight against a knight in an open field, but this is the ultimate unfair market. You use your ascanas to unhorse the few who are still mounted, and then you use your coltel to find the gaps in their visors. There is a quirky fringe tidbit that claims the Catalans spared only one man, Boniface of Verona, simply because he had been kind to the company during the negotiations. The rest, they were the redundant staff of an old regime, and you are the hostile takeover personified. Historians still argue whether the massacre at Hamiros was an act of pure vengeance or a cold, calculated political necessity. If you let these men live, they would just return with another army from France or Naples. To secure the market, you have to remove the competition entirely. You find yourself standing over a young squire in silk tabards, his eyes wide with a terror that no heraldry could protect him from. You don't feel the chivalric urge to offer him a ransom. You remember the hunger of the Thracian winter and the ghost coins of Constantinople. In the corporate logic of the company, a prisoner is just an expense you can't afford. You close the account with a single, practiced stroke of your short sword. The air is thick with the smell of iron and marsh gas. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, the screaming starts to fade into a low, bubbling groan. The Duchy of Athens has effectively ceased to exist as a political entity in the space of 3 hours. You see the Duke's banner lying in the mud, trampled by the very peasants he mocked. You wipe your blade on a piece of discarded French silk, feeling a strange, hollow triumph. You've won the final settlement, but the sheer scale of the carnage is breathtaking. Out of the hundreds of knights who charged, only a handful escaped the mire. UVA disrupted the industry of Greek feudalism so thoroughly that there is uneven a board of directors left to surrender to you. There is no peace treaty to sign because there is no one left to sign it. You and the other shareholders of the great Catalan Company are now the de facto owners of the land. You look around at your brothers-in-arms men who were outcasts, mercenaries, and disruptors and realize that you've just inherited a country. You aren't just an employee anymore. You are part of the new ownership group. You spend the evening auditing the battlefield, collecting the gold spurs and the signet rings that will serve as the dividend for this quarter. It's a grisly task, but the company's books must be balanced. The night after the battle is eerily quiet. Usually, after a victory, there is singing. But tonight, there is only the sound of the wind through the reeds. You sit by a fire fueled by broken land shafts, watching the stars reflect in the still flooded pools of the Cephasus. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicily. How far you've come from those sun-scorched docks. You've gone from being a disposable asset to the sovereign of the Acropolis. You probably wouldn't survive the imposter syndrome if you had time to think about it, but the company is already moving. The acquisition is only half finished. Now you have to occupy the offices. As you prepare to march toward the city of Athens itself, you feel a new sense of responsibility. You aren't just moving to the next job. You're moving into your new home. The forgotten archives will mark Hamiros as the end of Frankish Greece and the beginning of the Catalan Duchy. You check your gear one last time, the mud of the swamp still drying on your boots. You are a conqueror now, an owner, a managing partner in a Mediterranean empire. You take a deep breath of the cooling air, the scent of the swamp fading as you turn your face toward the mountains. The merger with history is complete. The march from the blood-soaked marshes of the Cephasus to the gates of Athens feels like a victory parade for a ghost story. You aren't running toward a battle, you are walking into a vacuum. News of the liquidation at Hamiros has reached the city before you, traveling on the wings of terrified survivors and frantic whispers. As you approach the massive walls that have stood since the days of Pericles, there is no one to man the ramparts. The widows of the Frankish knights have fled to Euboea, and the local Greek population, the permanent staff of the region, is waiting to see who their new managers will be. You march through the Dippolon Gate not as a tourist or a student of philosophy, but as a shareholder in a corporate takeover. You probably wouldn't survive the intellectual weight of this city if you stopped to think about it. But your boots are too busy rhythmically striking the ancient stone to care about the brand heritage of Plato. It is a mainstream historical fact that after the Battle of Hamiros, the Catalan Company took control of the Duchy of Athens and the Duchy of Neopatras, ruling them for nearly 80 years. This wasn't a temporary occupation. It was a total acquisition of the state apparatus. You find yourself assigned to a patrol on the Acropolis, walking the same paths where Socrates once questioned the nature of justice. To you, the Parthenon isn't a temple of Athena. It's a high-ground observation post with excellent lines of sight over the Saronic Gulf. You look at the marble columns weathered by centuries of sun, and you see the perfect place to stack your crates of acquired assets. The company has officially moved its headquarters into the most prestigious real estate in the Mediterranean. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history regarding the Almogavar Acropolis. Legend has it that the rough Spanish mercenaries, unfamiliar with the refined Greek sculptures, mistook some of the more lifelike statues for petrified enemies and tried to interrogate them for the location of hidden gold. While you aren't that thick-headed, there is a definite cultural disconnect. You and your colla spend your first night sleeping in the propylaea, the monumental gateway to the citadel. You've replaced the silk hangings of the Frankish dukes with your own sun-bleached blankets and the smell of roasting lamb. You are the new money in an ancient town, and you have absolutely no intention of following the old company policies. Historians still argue whether the Catalans' rule over Athens was a dark age of barbaric pillaging or a surprisingly stable period of mercenary governance. From your perspective, leaning against a marble frieze and watching the sunset over the Piraeus, it feels like a period of intense rebranding. You aren't just an army anymore. You are a colonial administration. You have to figure out how to collect taxes from the Greeks, how to manage the trade routes with the Venetians, and how to keep the board of directors, the Council of 12, from bickering over the best villas. You realize that winning the market was the easy part. Operating the market is where the real work begins. You've traded your javelins for ledgers, at least for the afternoon. The transition from a nomadic army to a settled elite is jarring. You see your fellow Almogavars marrying the Frankish widows you did Eunkila, merger and acquisition of the most personal kind. You are inheriting their titles, their lands, and their social standing, but you are doing it on your own terms. You still speak the rough Catalan of your youth, and you still awaken the iron when the sun goes down, but you are starting to appreciate the perks of management. You find yourself drinking better wine and wearing tunics made of finer wool. You probably would unsurvive the lifestyle creep if you were unstill training every day on the Nix, the ancient meeting place of Athenian democracy, which you now use as a drilling ground for your security personnel. There is a strange beauty in the Catalan Athens. You've turned a cradle of civilization into a corporate fortress. The city is quiet, but it's the quiet of a place that is under new, very firm management. You notice the local Greeks looking at you with a mixture of curiosity and cautious relief. At least you are the Turks. And at least you aren't the Franks who looked down on them for a century. You are the disruptive outsiders who have become the establishment overnight. You spend your days patrolling the agora, the ancient marketplace, ensuring that the transaction fees are paid and the peace is kept. You are the law and order candidate in a land that hasn't seen real order in decades. One evening, you stand on the edge of the Acropolis, looking out at the sprawling city below. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicilian? Call back to a life that feels 1,000 years away? You've gone from a starving mercenary on a Sicilian dock to a ruler of the city of Plato. You've conquered the East by treating war like a business, and now you are reaping the dividends. The forgotten archives will call this your golden hour, the moment when the mercenary corporation finally found its home. You feel a sense of profound, gritty accomplishment. You've disrupted the history of Greece, and now you're going to enjoy the royalty payments. As the moon rises over Mount Hymettus, casting a silver light over the ruins of the academy, you hear the distant familiar sound of an Almogavar sharpening his blade. It's a reminder that even though you are management now, you are still the muscle. The company is the only family you have, and Athens is the only office you need. You lay your head down on the cool marble, the soft hum of the Mediterranean night, providing a background noise for your dreams of empire. The Catalan takeover is complete, and the Athens branch is officially open for business and this time, you're the ones writing the contracts. Now that you've occupied the office, you realize that a corporation cannot survive on plunder alone. It needs a legal framework, a set of articles of incorporation to govern the new territory. You are no longer just a soldier in a leather tunic. You are a witness to the birth of a unique legal entity. The company's leadership, sensing that they are surrounded by hostile neighbors and suspicious empires, decides to implement the constitutions of Catalonia and the statutes of Barcelona as the law of the land. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Catalan Duchy of Athens was governed not by the feudal whims of a single lord, but by a codified system of laws brought directly from the mercantile heart of Aragon. You stand guard in the council chambers as the Adelids debate the fine points of property rights and inheritance, realizing that you are trading the law of the sword for the law of the ledger. The statutes of Barcelona are the bedrock of your new society. They prioritize the rights of the shareholders, the Catalan veterans, above all others. You probably wouldn't survive a modern legal audit of these rules, as they are unapologetically biased toward the conquerors. Only Catalans are allowed to hold high office, and the mergers and acquisitions of local Greek estates are strictly regulated to ensure the company maintains its majority stake in the region. You watch as the Council of 12 signs off on the new bylaws, their calloused hands handling the quill with the same firm grip they used on their javelins. This is corporate governance in its rawest form, designed to prevent any single individual from becoming a CEO with enough power to betray the collective again. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore regarding these statutes, claiming that the company included a blood clause, which mandated that any Catalan who married a local must teach their children the Awaken the Iron ritual before they were allowed to inherit property. While likely an exaggeration of the company's fierce cultural insularity, it reflects the reality of your situation. You are a small, elite staff managing a much larger population of contractors and clients. You need to maintain your brand identity or risk being absorbed and forgotten. You spend your evenings in the shadow of the Acropolis, listening to the younger men recite the new laws, a strange litany of mercantile jargon mixed with frontier justice. Historians still argue whether this legal framework was an enlightened precursor to modern constitutionalism or merely a closed-shop protectionist racket. From your perspective, it's about risk management. You've seen what happens when the rules are vague. Get ghost coins and banquet massacres. By codifying the law, you are creating a stable environment for long-term investment. You see the Venetian and Genoese merchants returning to the Piraeus, their ships cautiously entering the harbor because they know that under Catalan law, a contract is a contract. You've turned a failed state into a predictable market, and the dividends are starting to flow in the form of port duties and trade taxes. However, the statutes also create a rigid hierarchy. At the top are the veterans of the Vengeance, the original founding partners. Below them are the newer recruits, and at the bottom are the local Greeks and the remnants of the Frankish population. You navigate this hierarchy with a professional ease, knowing exactly where you stand on the org chart. You are a senior security associate with a vested interest in the company's success. You find yourself enforcing laws that protect the company's intellectual property, which in this case means the military tactics and the iron discipline that keep you in power. You aren't just a guard, you are an enforcer of a new social contract. There is a strange comfort in the bureaucracy of the new duchy. You see the scribes recording the grain yields and the tax assessments on the same parchment used for military orders. The company has successfully pivoted from a nomadic army to a settled administration. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicilian, memory of a time when the only law you knew was the survival of the fittest. Now, you are protected by a system of due process, even if that process is heavily weighted in your favor. You probably wouldn't survive the boredom of a long peace, but for now, the work of building a state is as demanding as any campaign. One afternoon, you watch a public reading of the statutes in the Agora. The local Greeks listen in silence, their faces unreadable. They are the end users of your new system, and they are still deciding if they like the product. You realize that the company's longevity depends on more than just the edge of your coattail. It depends on the reliability of the brand. If you can provide a stable, predictable legal environment, they will work for you. If you return to the arbitrary pillaging of the Thracian days, the market will reject you. It's a delicate balance of power and policy, and you are the one standing on the corner, ensuring the terms and conditions are met. As the sun sets over the Saronic Gulf, the statutes of Barcelona are locked away in the citadel for the night. You take your post on the walls, looking out at a city that is slowly coming back to life under your management. The forgotten archives will record this as the peak of Catalan administrative brilliance. You feel a sense of quiet pride. You aren't just a mercenary anymore. You are a legislator of sorts, a guardian of a code that has turned a band of outlaws into the masters of Athens. The corporate hierarchy is set, the laws are drafted, and the Athens branch is finally moving out of the startup phase and into stable growth. Living in the shadow of the Acropolis isn't the romantic philosophical retreat the poets promised. It's a constant exercise in facility management within a crumbling museum. You wake up on a pallet of straw tucked into a corner of the propylaea, the monumental gateway where the marble is so slick and cold, it feels like sleeping on an iceberg. To the world, you are a conqueror of the city of the wise. But to you, Athens is a series of logistical puzzles and ancient plumbing that hasn't worked since the Caesars. You spend your mornings patrolling the narrow, winding streets of the Plaka district, where the scent of roasting meat from an Almogavar's fire mingles with the dusty, honeyed air of the Attic plain. You've traded the open-plan office of the Anatolian plateau for a dense urban labyrinth of white stone and legacy architecture. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Catalans did not destroy the ancient monuments of Athens. Instead, they repurposed them. You witness the Parthenon, which had already been converted into a Christian cathedral by the Franks, serving as your strategic headquarters. The Council of 12 meets under the watchful eyes of stone goddesses, their rough-edged armor clashing with the refined aesthetics of the classical age. You probably wouldn't survive a conversation with a Greek scholar about the golden ratio. But you know exactly how many men it takes to hold the south wall against a potential Venetian landing. You are a frontier manager living in a heritage site, and the irony of using a 500-year-old temple as a grain silo isn't lost on you at S. Just practical inventory storage. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore from this period regarding the ghost of Socrates. Some of the younger Almogavars, jumpy from too many nights on watch duty, claim that an old man in a tattered tunic wanders the agora at night, asking performance review questions that make their heads spin. They say if you can't answer his riddles about the nature of courage, your Ascona will lose its edge. While you haven't met the philosopher's ghost yourself, the weight of the past is a tangible, intangible asset of the city. You find yourself walking past the ruins of the Library of Hadrian, noticing how your brothers-in-arms have used the ancient stones to patch the city walls. In the Catalan Duchy, history is just raw material for infrastructure upgrades. Historians still argue whether the Catalan occupation of Athens was a period of cultural stagnation or a unique cross-pollination of Iberian and Hellenic traditions. From your perspective, it's a merger of necessity. You've started to pick up bits of the local Greek dialect, mostly the words for tax, wine, and don't stab me. You see the local population. You aren't the distant, arrogant Franks who treated them like serfs. You are the rugged, blunt Catalans who, while violent, are at least predictable. You've brought the statutes of Barcelona to the birthplace of democracy. And the locals seem to appreciate a legal framework that actually has a written user manual. Life in the city is a balance of security and leisure. When you aren't on duty, you find yourself at the Piraeus harbor, watching the trade and logistics of the Mediterranean flow, and you see ships from Barcelona, Valencia, and Mallorca unloading salt, cloth, and Spanish influence while loading up on Athenian oil and honey. You realize that the company has successfully verticalized its operations. You control the land, the law, and the supply chain to the west. You sit in a seaside tavern, eating grilled octopus and drinking a sharp, resonated wine that tastes like the very pine trees of Attica, and you feel a sense of executive success. You've transformed from a nomadic disruptor into a settled stakeholder. However, the maintenance costs of living in a ruin are high. The city walls need constant repair, and the surrounding countryside, the production zones of Atticus, still recovering from the wars. You spend your afternoons on rural outreach missions, ensuring that the local farmers are meeting their production quotas and that the Turkish raiders are unpoaching your clients. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicilian, call back to a time when you were just a temp worker in the war industry. Now, you are the regional manager, and the operational risks are much more complex. You have to worry about the Pope's excommunication of the company, which makes international relations a bit of a headache. As the sun sets behind Mount Parnes, casting long violet shadows over the ruins of the Academy, you walk back up the zigzagging path to the Acropolis. The city lights begin to flicker below, a constellation of small business activity. You've occupied the high ground of history, and despite the crumbling marble and the strange, haunting echoes of the past, you feel at home. You aren't just a mercenary in a foreign town. You are the custodian of the brand. The forgotten archives will record this era as the Catalan twilight of Athens. But for you, it's just the standard operating procedure of a successful takeover. You take your post at the Nike Bastion, looking out over the sea. The wind carries the scent of salt and the distant sound of a Spanish guitarra, new soundtrack for an ancient city. You've proven that a corporation can not only conquer a cradle of civilization, but can also manage the assets for decades. You lay your hand on the warm marble of the parapet, feeling the heartbeat of a city that has seen 1,000 management changes. Tomorrow, there will be more taxes to collect and more walls to mend, but tonight, the Acropolis branch is secure. You close your eyes and breathe in the ancient air, ready for another day in the most beautiful office in the world. As the initial rush of conquest fades into the steady rhythm of occupation, you begin to see the true org chart of the Catalan Duchy. This isn't a kingdom where power flows solely from a crown. It is a complex, tiered corporate hierarchy of power that keeps 5,000 veterans from tearing the state apart. At the top sits the Vicar General, a sort of chief operating officer sent by the Crown of Aragon or the Kingdom of Sicily to represent the holding company back west. But you know where the real power lies, with the Consell de Centa, Council of the Hundred. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Catalan Company maintained a republican, almost communal power structure, even while ruling as dukes. You see the founding partners, the grizzled Attalids, who survived the Thracian vengeance, sitting in the council chambers. Their votes carrying the weight of a majority shareholder. You find yourself navigating this hierarchy with the careful precision of a middle manager aiming for a promotion. You aren't just a grunt anymore. You've been elevated to the rank of an Almogavars, a low-level officer with supervisory responsibilities over a dozen men. Your performance reviews happen every day on the walls of the Acropolis. If your men are disciplined and your sector of the wall is well maintained, your equity in the company's future grows. You probably wouldn't survive the cutthroat office politics of a modern firm, but here, the internal networking involves sharing a skin of wine and reminiscing about the Magnesia standoff. It's a hierarchy built on shared trauma and proven deliverables. You know that a promotion isn't just about a title, it's about a larger share of the royalty payments from the local silk trade. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history concerning the hierarchy of the blade. Some chroniclers suggest that the Almogavars developed a secret system of notches on their coltels to signify their rank and the number of successful mergers they had completed on the battlefield. While likely a bit of veteran marketing to intimidate new recruits, the focus on meritocracy is real. In the Catalan Duchy, you aren't promoted because of who your father was. You are promoted because you can lead a hostile takeover of a Turkish raid. You spend your nights in the executive lounge, repurposed Greek Philidus cussing the strategic outlook for the coming season. You've moved from the production floor of the infantry to the strategic planning of the officer class. Historians still argue whether this corporate structure was the secret to the company's SATR market dominance in Greece, or the primary cause of its eventual dissolution. By giving every veteran a voice, you create a loyal staff. But you also create a board that is prone to endless bickering and internal litigation. You've seen council meetings turn into shouting matches that nearly ended in liquidations of a different kind. You realize that managing the talent is far harder than acquiring the territory. You have to balance the needs of the founding shareholders with the ambitions of the junior associates, who arrived after the Great March. It's a delicate human resources challenge in a city that doesn't forgive weakness. The hierarchy extends down to the contracted labor, the local Greeks. You are learning how to outsource the mundane tasks of city life while keeping the core competencies of violence and lawmaking within the Catalan inner circle. You see the Greek magistrates reporting to your Attalids, their quarterly reports on olive oil production and port duties being scrutinized with the intensity of a tax audit. You aren't just a soldier, you are an operational auditor, ensuring that the revenue streams are flowing toward the company treasury. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from the Sicilian startup as a callback to a time when you were just a temp with a spear. Now, you are part of the management layer of a Mediterranean power. However, the corporate culture is starting to change. You notice the younger Almogavars becoming soft. They are spending more time in the Greek baths and less time awakening the iron. The hierarchy is becoming rigid, and the disruptive spirit that allowed you to conquer Athens is being replaced by a desire for stable dividends. You worry about the long-term sustainability of a mercenary state that stops being a mercenary. You spend your afternoons drilling your unit on the Nix, the ancient stones echoing with the sound of Spanish commands. You are trying to maintain the brand standards in a world that is trying to turn you into just another group of legacy lords. As the sun sets over the Saronic Gulf, the corporate headquarters on the Acropolis glows with torchlight. You look at the men around you, some old and scarred, some young and ambitious. You are all part of the same entity, bound by the same statutes. The hierarchy of the company is what saved you from the Byzantine betrayal, and it's what keeps you in power today. You feel a sense of professional satisfaction. You've successfully climbed the corporate ladder of the 14th century, and the view from the top is spectacular. You take a deep breath of the Attic air, ready to defend your market share against any competitor that dares to challenge the company's sovereign dominance. You walk the perimeter of the Parthenon, the CEO's office of your new world. The forgotten archives will record this as a period of administrative consolidation. But for you, it's about keeping the team together. You know that as long as the hierarchy holds, the company holds. You lay your hand on a cool, fluted column, feeling the weight of the corporate legacy you've helped build. Tomorrow, there will be more personnel issues to resolve and more strategic alliances to forge. But tonight, the board is in session and the firm is secure. Being the master of Athens is one thing, but being recognized as the legitimate owner by the global market of the 14th century is an entirely different logistical hurdle. You find yourself standing on the ramparts of the Acropolis, watching a small, high-speed galley skip across the Aegean. It's not carrying silk or spices, it's carrying diplomatic correspondence. You are currently excommunicated by the Pope, a legal status that effectively makes the great Catalan Company a corporate pariah in the eyes of Christendom. To the Vatican, you are a band of sons of perdition who stole a duchy from its rightful Frankish investors. You probably would unsurvive the spiritual anxiety of this period if you were so busy counting the actual gold in your coffers. But brand legitimacy matters. If you want to trade with the big firms in Venice and Naples, it is a mainstream historical fact that for much of their rule, the Catalan Company operated under the shadow of papal disapproval, forcing them to engage in a complex rebranding campaign. You watch your vicar general, the regional executive, draft long, flowery letters to the Crown of Aragon. You are seeking a strategic partnership. By offering to hold Athens as a vassal state of the King of Sicily or the King of Aragon, you are looking for a parent company to provide legal cover. You aren't just mercenaries anymore. You are trying to incorporate into the established European order. You've traded the Catalan vengeance for Catalan diplomacy, and the terms of service are being negotiated over glasses of imported wine. There is a quirky bit of fringe history regarding these negotiations, claiming that the company sent a gift basket to the Pope that included a piece of the true cross they deliberated from a Byzantine monastery, along with a polite note suggesting that the excommunication might have been a clerical error. While the Pope didn't bite immediately, the anecdote highlights the company's transactional view of the soul. You spend your Sundays in the Parthenon now, the Church of St. Mary, watching your rough-handed brothers-in-arms pretend to be pious corporate citizens. You've learned that a blessed state is a stable state, and you're willing to pay the compliance fees to get back into the Church's good graces. Historians still argue whether the company/move to place itself under the Crown of Aragon was a sign of weakness or a brilliant exit strategy. By becoming part of the Aragonese conglomerate, you gain access to their diplomatic networks and naval protection. However, you also have to deal with headquarters wanting a bigger cut of your profits. You see the Aragonese ambassadors arriving in the Piraeus, their refined manners clashing with the rugged startup culture of the veterans. They want to see the books, and they want to ensure that the subsidiary in Athens is following global standards. You realize that sovereignty often comes with a management fee. The diplomacy isn't just with the West. You are also managing the competition in the East. You have to negotiate non-compete clauses with the Turks and trade agreements with the Venetians. You've become a pivot point in the Mediterranean economy. You find yourself escorting Venetian merchants through the city, ensuring they see a secure and flourishing market. You've traded the Ascona for the handshake, and you're finding that words can be just as sharp as steel. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicilia, memory of a time when the only international relations you had involved a boarding axe. Now, you are a stakeholder in a global web of treaties. However, brand damage is hard to repair. The French and the Neapolitans still view you as usurpers, and they are constantly looking for a way to short your stock. You have to maintain a higher readiness posture while simultaneously projecting peaceful stability. It's a public relations nightmare. You spend your afternoons training the younger recruits to look official and professional on the walls, making sure their leather is oiled and their banners are clean. You aren't just an army, you are the face of the firm, and the world is watching for any sign of insolvency. As the sun sets over the ruins of the temple of Olympian Zeus, the diplomatic pouches are sealed and sent back to the coast. You feel a sense of long-term growth in the air. The company has survived the vengeance and the acquisition, and now it is surviving the legitimacy phase. You probably wouldn't survive the boredom of a typical diplomat's life, But as an Almogatan, you enjoy the executive privilege of knowing the state is finally being verified by the powers that be. You've turned a hostile takeover into a subsidiary of a kingdom, and the Athens branch has never looked more stable. You take your post on the Acropolis, looking out at the city lights. You are no longer unclaimed liabilities. You are the Catalan Duchy of Athens, a recognized, if controversial, player on the world stage. The forgotten archives will record this as your diplomatic golden age. You feel a sense of gritty, hard-won peace. You've forced the kings and the Pope to deal with you on your own terms. And you've proven that a mercenary corporation can buy its way into the aristocracy of nations. You lay your hand on the cold marble, ready for whatever merger history has in store for you next. The stability of your corporate holdings is suddenly challenged by a new market entrant that looks mirror-image familiar. Word reaches the Acropolis that a fresh wave of mercenaries, the Company of Navarre, has crossed into Greece. They aren't here to join your firm. They are here to disrupt your monopoly. These Navarrese soldiers have watched your success story from across the Mediterranean and have decided that if a group of Catalans can own a duchy, then they can too. It is a mainstream historical fact that in the late 14th century, the Catalan Duchy of Athens faced a series of existential hostile takeover attempts by the Navarrese Company acting on behalf of the Nario Accioli and other rival interests. You find yourself back in your leather armor, realizing that in the mercenary world, intellectual property, your very business model, is constantly being pirated by the next hungry startup. You stand on the walls of Thebes, which has become the primary operations center for your northern defense. The Navarrese aren't like the legacy Frankish knights you drowned in the marshes decades ago. They are modern professionals. They use the same light infantry tactics, the same aggressive market entry strategies, and they don't care about the chivalric code any more than you do. You probably wouldn't survive a direct price war with these men, as they are younger, hungrier, and backed by the deep pockets of the Florentine banking houses. You watch their scouts on the horizon and realize that you have become the established incumbent, and the Navarrese are the disruptive innovators trying to force you into bankruptcy. There is a quirky tidbit of fringe history from this mercenary versus mercenary conflict involving a stolen password. Legend has it that the Navarrese tried to infiltrate the Theban citadel by dressing as Catalan messengers and using an outdated corporate password from the Sicilian Wars. They were reportedly caught when a Catalan sentry asked them the name of Roger de Flor's favorite horse, a security question they couldn't answer. While likely a bit of veteran counterintelligence lore, it reflects the paranoia of the era. You don't just fear the enemy's steel, you fear their ability to socially engineer their way into your secure servers. You spend your nights double-checking the watch roster, knowing that the men on the other side of the field are essentially your younger, more aggressive selves. Historians still argue whether the Navarrese Company was truly superior in skill, or if the Catalan staff had simply become too bloated and complacent after years of sitting on the board of directors. From your perspective, leaning against a battlement in the Greek sun, the market pressure is undeniable. The Navarrese have successfully acquired the city of Durazzo and are now leveraging their position to squeeze your northern borders. UV had to recall your senior associates from their comfortable Athenian villas and put them back in the mud of the frontier. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicily, memory of a time when you were the ones doing the squeezing. Now, the market cycle has turned, and you are the ones being audited by the sword. The defense of the duchy becomes a grueling series of litigation by combat. You participate in a skirmish near the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, where the two companies meet in a brutal merger of iron. It's a strange, disorienting experience. You are fighting men who look like you, move like you, and even swear like you. There is no cultural barrier to hide behind. They know your tactics, and you know theirs. You realize that the only way to beat a rival firm that uses your own business model is to out-execute them on the production floor. You drive your coltel into the gap of a Navarrese leather tunic, feeling the grim reality of market competition in the 14th century. There is no room in Greece for two mercenary corporations. One of you has to go out of business. The Navarrese threat forces a restructuring of the Catalan defenses. You see the vicar general authorizing emergency capital expenditures to repair the walls of Athens and Thebes. UVA had to dilute your shares by hiring local Greek and even Turkish subcontractors to bolster your ranks. The pure Catalan brand is being compromised to ensure the survival of the entity. You spend your days training these new hires, trying to instill the iron discipline into men who don't have the company history that you do. It's a difficult onboarding process, and you worry that the corporate culture is being lost in the scaling of the defense. As the sun sets over the ruins of Plataea, the Navarrese campfires flicker in the distance like competitor advertisements you can't ignore. You feel a sense of executive stress that you never felt as a simple Almogavar. You've gone from acquiring assets to defending the portfolio, and the latter is much more exhausting. You probably would unsurvive the burn rate of this conflict if the company did have nearly 80 years of accumulated capital to fall back on. You've built a state, and now you have to prove that you can protect it from the very forces that created it. You take your post on the wall, the iron of your javelin cold against your palm. The forgotten archives will record this as the Mercenary Wars, the moment when the Catalan monopoly was finally challenged. You feel a sense of professional defiance. You are the legacy firm, the established player, and you aren't going to let some Navarrese upstarts take your market share without a fight. You look out into the darkness, ready to defend the brand with everything you have. The Athens branch has survived emperors and popes, and it will survive this hostile takeover to Orull. Burn the ledger yourself before you surrender the keys. The air in the duchy has grown heavy, not with the smoke of war, but with the slow, creeping fog of corporate stagnation. You stand on the battlements of the Acropolis, and for the first time in your life, your knees ache with the dampness of the Mediterranean morning. You aren't the young Almogavar who leaped onto the docks of Messina anymore. You are a senior partner in a firm that is starting to show its age. The twilight of the Catalan duchy is a mainstream historical fact, marking a period where the fierce nomadic aggression of your youth has been replaced by the comfortable legacy management of the second and third generations. You look at the younger men, the sons of the original conquerors, and you see middle managers who have never known the hunger of a Thracian winter. They wear silk under their leather, and their coattails are more for show than for liquidating an enemy's assets. The softening of the company is a classic case of success and decline. You've become the very legacy establishment you once sought to disrupt. Your operating model has shifted from expansion to asset protection. You spend more time in the boardroom discussing land titles and dowries than you do awakening the iron. You probably wouldn't survive the grueling startup phase of the company today. And honestly, you aren't sure the current staff could either. There is a quirky bit of fringe lore from this era that says the veteran Almogavars actually banned the use of soft pillows in the barracks, fearing that comfort was a Byzantine plot to drain the company's competitive edge. You still sleep on the hard marble, a cultural holdout in a world that is moving toward the soft beds of the Renaissance. Historians still argue whether the eventual fall of the duchy was due to external market pressures, like the rise of the Ottoman Turks and the Florentine bank soar, an internal systemic failure of the Catalan spirit. From your perspective, it's a matter of brand dilution. The original veterans were bound by a contract of blood and survival. The new generation is bound by shareholder agreements and inheritance laws. You see the local Greek population becoming more assertive, sensing that the management has lost its lethal focus. The statutes of Barcelona are still on the books, but they are being enforced with less and less operational vigor. You feel like a founder watching his visionary startup turn into a slow-moving utility company. The market is also changing around you. To the east, the Ottoman conglomerate is expanding with a ferocity that reminds you of your own youth. To the west, the Accioli family, the Florentine venture capitalists, are buying up the debt of neighboring states and looking at Athens as an undervalued asset, ripe for a takeover. You realize that the company's business model of sovereign mercenary rule is becoming obsolete in a world of centralized monarchies and high-finance banking. UVA had to refinance the duchy's defenses so many times that the interest payments are starting to eat into the core capital. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicilian, memory of a time when the world was simple, and the only financial report that mattered was the weight of the loot in your pack. There is a strange melancholy beauty to this twilight. You spend your evenings in the agora, watching the sunset paint the ancient ruins in shades of gold and amber. You've held this city for nearly 80 years, a tenure that no one thought possible when you first arrived as Latins in rags. You've left a Catalan footprint on the cradle of civilization, but the edges of that footprint are beginning to blur. You notice the intercompany marriages between the Catalans and the Greeks are creating a new hybrid culture, a merger that is slowly erasing the fierce Spanish identity of the founding partners. You are witnessing the end-of-life cycle for the greatest mercenary corporation the world has ever seen. One afternoon, you watch a group of young recruits practicing with the Oscar. Their form is perfect, their gear is expensive, but they lack the desperation that made the Almogavars the terror of the East. They are playing at war. Whereas you lived it as a hostile necessity, you realize that the forgotten archives are already being written, even as you stand there. The brand is still strong, but the product is losing its disruptive power. You feel a sense of executive fatigue. You've seen the rise, you've seen the peak, and now you are watching the managed decline. As the stars come out over Mount Hymettus, you take a slow walk along the walls of the Acropolis. The city below is quiet, the lights of the Athens branch flickering like embers in a dying fire. You aren't afraid of the end. In the world of the forgotten archives, every corporation eventually dissolves. You are proud of the dividends you've paid to history. You've proven that a band of outcasts could rule the city of Plato, and that a corporate contract could be stronger than a king's crown. You lay your hand on the cold, fluted marble of a column, feeling the weight of the decades. The twilight is a time for reflection, not for growth strategies. You've had a good run, and the stock price of the Catalan Company will remain high in the legends of the Mediterranean long after you are gone. You take a deep breath of the cooling air, the scent of the sea a constant background hum to your life. Tomorrow, there will be more legacy issues to manage, but tonight, the duchy is still yours. You close your eyes, ready to fade into the archives with the same quiet, professional dignity with which you once conquered the world. The legacy of the great Catalan Company, ISNT, found in a single monument or a dusty book of law. It is woven into the very bedrock of Greece, a brand legacy that persisted long after the firm finally closed its doors. And you realize that for nearly 80 years, you didn't just occupy this land, you rebranded it. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Catalan rule was one of the longest continuous periods of Western dominance in central Greece, outlasting many of the traditional feudal kingdoms of the era. You see the architectural dividends of your stay, the reinforced bastions on the Acropolis and the Catalan-style masonry in the walls of Thebes. You've left a corporate signature on the cradle of civilization that even the passing of centuries has unfully erased. As you walk through the city, you see the intangible assets the company left behind. The Greek language in this region still carries the faint, sharp echoes of Catalan loanwords terms for tools, for trade, and for the operations of daily life. You probably wouldn't survive the linguistic shifts of the next few centuries. But for now, you hear the Spanish inflection in the markets of the Piraeus. There is a quirky fringe tidbit regarding the Catalan curse that lingered in the Greek consciousness for generations. Even into the modern era, the phrase, "May the vengeance of the Catalans reach you," was used as a potent malediction. It is a testament to the market impact you had. You were so efficient, so terrifyingly professional, that your brand name became synonymous with an inescapable fate. Historians still argue whether the Catalan Company's rule was a predatory exploitation or a necessary stabilization of a fractured region. From your perspective, it was the ultimate proof of concept. You proved that a corporation of free men, governed by a board and a contract, could maintain a state without the need for a traditional monarch. You pioneered a sovereign mercenary model that would be studied and feared by the Italian condottieri of the next century. You've disrupted the feudal history of Europe by showing that meritocracy and equity could outperform blood and title. You are the ancestor of every professional private military company that will ever follow. The legacy also lives on in the royal titles of Europe. To this very day, the King of Spain still counts Duke of Athens and Neopatras among his official legacy titles. It's a symbolic asset held in a historical trust, a reminder of the time when a band of rugged frontiersmen from Aragon became the masters of Plato's city. You find it amusing that your hard-won acquisitions are now just lines on a royal letterhead. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from Sicily, a startup cost that eventually led to a duchy that kings still claim. The ROI on your blood and sweat has been paid out over 700 years of history. But the most profound legacy is the human capital. You see, the children of the company, the second-generation hires, who have become a bridge between the East and the West. You've created a merger of cultures that wouldn't have happened under a traditional conquest. You've brought the maritime laws of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Greece and the grit of the Spanish frontier to the marble halls of the Acropolis. You are part of the forgotten archives because your story doesn't fit the neat boxes of nationalism. You were a company, an entity, a collective of global citizens before the term even existed. One afternoon, you watch a ship departing for Barcelona. Carrying the last official reports of the duchy, you feel a sense of project completion. You've taken a failing Star-Tuppa band of starving mercenaries and turned it into a market leader that ruled for nearly a century. You probably wouldn't survive the post-merger integration of the coming centuries. As the Ottoman Empire prepares its own hostile takeover of Greece, but you know that your historical equity is secure. You've done the work, you've hit the KPIs, and you've left a mark that no downsizing can remove. As the sun sets over the Saronic Gulf, the purple shadows lengthening over the ruins, you feel a deep professional peace. You aren't just a footnote in history. You are a case study in survival and ambition. The Great Catalan Company is a name that will always evoke a mixture of awe and terror. You've managed the assets of the ancient world with a modern efficiency, and you've proven that the mercenary spirit is the most powerful force in the Mediterranean market. You take a final look at the Acropolis, the headquarters where you spent your best years. The forgotten archives will keep your story safe, a locked file of courage and corporate brilliance. You lay your hand on the warm stone, feeling the legacy of the company pulse beneath your palm. Tomorrow, the archives will close on this chapter, but tonight, the Duke of Athens is still a Catalan, and the firm is still in the black. You take a deep breath of the Attic night, ready to step into the quiet halls of history with your head held high and your shares fully vested. The final audit of the Great Catalan Company doesn't happen in a courtroom or accounting house. It happens in the long, quiet shadows that stretch across the ruins of the Acropolis. As the sun dips below the horizon for the very last time on your watch, you are standing near the pedestal of a missing statue, looking out over a city that has finally, inevitably, transitioned to a new set of owners. The final archive is being compiled, and as you walk through the silent office of your youth, you find the traces of the Almogavars hidden in the very bedrock of history. You see a Desperto Pharaoh scratched into a marble block near the Parthenona graffiti of the soul left by a man who was likely your brother. It is a mainstream historical fact that in 1388, the Duchy of Athens finally fell to the Accioli family. But even as the physical assets change hands, the intellectual property of your legend remains. You wander down the winding paths toward the Agora, noticing how the quirky tidbits of your stay have become the local lore of the residents. Historians still argue whether the Catalan collapse was a failure of management or simply a market exit dictated by the overwhelming tide of the Ottoman expansion. From your perspective, it feels more like a liquidation of a world that no longer exists. You probably wouldn't survive the modernity of the coming Renaissance, with its standing armies and centralized bureaucracies, because the company was a creature of a very specific, wilder era. You were the forgotten archives before the ink was even a corporate mercenary state that was too aggressive to last forever, but too successful to be ignored. You find a small bronze coin in the dirt, one of those company tokens from the Gallipoli. Day's end, you press it into a crack in the ancient wall, a final deposit for the future, to find quiet echoes of the company are everywhere if you know how to listen. You hear it in the rhythm of the waves hitting the Piraeus, a sound that hasn't changed since you first acquired the harbor. You hear it in the sharp staccato bark of a guard's command in the distance. The Catalan vengeance has faded into a Catalan quiet, a period of reflection after a lifetime of hostile takeovers. You've traded the iron discipline for the quiet of the archive, and as you feel the cool night air of Attica settle over your shoulders, you realize that your contract with history is finally fulfilled. You aren't just a soldier anymore. You are a founding partner of a story that will be told as long as men value the audacity of the underdog. The forgotten archives are closing their heavy oak doors, and you are the last one to leave the office. The world of the Almogavars is slowly fading now, the sharp edges of the coltel softening into the gentle curves of memory. You can feel the heavy weight of the iron lifting from your spirit, replaced by the cool, rhythmic pulse of the Mediterranean tide. The fires of Thrace have long since burned out, and the dust of the Anatolian plains has settled into a soft velvet blanket that covers the scars of the past. You are no longer standing on the sun-drenched docks of Messina or the blood-stained marshes of the Cephissus. You are simply drifting on a sea of quiet echoes where the voices of the Council of 12 have become a distant melodic hum. The marble of the Acropolis is cooling beneath your touch, releasing the last of the day's heat like a long, contented sigh. There is no more market to disrupt, no more assets to acquire, and no more invoices to settle. You are safe, you are home, and the ledger is finally balanced. The stars above Athens are the same stars that guided you across the Bosphorus. But tonight, they aren't firestones or omens, they are just soft, flickering lights in a vast and peaceful sky. Your breath is slowing, matching the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the fan's background hum, and the weight of your armor is nothing more than a warm, protective shadow. The story of the great Catalan Company is tucked away now, a vested interest in the dreams of the past. You've done enough, you've marched far enough, and the Athens branch is in good hands. Let the forgotten archives rest in their silent golden dust. The world is quiet, the night is still, and your journey through the medieval corporation has reached its final, peaceful settlement. Close your eyes, let the iron discipline dissolve into a soft, silver mist, and drift away into the quietest corner of the archive.